Chapter 327. Alexander was stunned. He lowered his head and whispered, "Father, why would you care about such a trivial matter?" Philip II replied, "If it were someone else, it would indeed be a trivial matter, and I wouldn't want to get involved. But have you really never doubted why the girl appeared, and why she wanted to win the favor of you and Madanzo at the same time? You should know who Madanzo is, and you should know who Amon is. Do you still remember the oracle 2 years ago? The people mentioned by the great father of the gods, Zeus, should be Amon and Madanzo." Alexander still lowered his head and said, "Of course I know what the arrival of Mr. Amon and Madanzo means to the kingdom of Macedonia. Please rest assured, father, no matter what, I will not offend Madanzo and Amon because of Helen." Philip II said again, "It doesn't just depend on whether you are willing or not. If someone has the intention to provoke a dispute, there will definitely be a rift. Since you have this attitude, you might as well express it and bless Madanzo and Helen as a friend. Helen has no reason to refuse such blessings." Alexander did not speak, but just frowned slightly. Philip II stood up, walked over, and patted him on the shoulder. "My child, what is your real vow? Is it the future kingdom of Macedonia? Or is it a beautiful girl, Helen? It seems that the two do not contradict each other, and a powerful king can naturally have the most beautiful girl in the world. But now there is a contradiction, and it is not necessary. You still have a long way to go, and there are many trials to go through. You will face many such choices." As they spoke, Amon sat next to them and listened quietly. He quietly performed a kind of magic, the guardian of Isis. This was a kind of blessing magic, which could make people forget pain and fatigue, and make their souls more awake and at ease. The purpose of this was not only to appease Alexander, but the most important function of the blessing magic was to eliminate all kinds of negative influences on the soul. As the goddess of love and beauty of the Olympian pantheon, Aphrodite must be proficient in the art of seduction. It was a divine spell that could affect the senses of the soul, and had the effect of charm. It was similar to the summoning divine spell that established a soul. Amon had already seen through her tricks on the wroth beast, so he naturally would not let his guard down. If Alexander's soul was affected by the effect of the divine charm, it would not be easy for Philip II to persuade him. Amon did not see such a trace in Alexander's soul, but he still used the guardian of Isis to pray for Alexander. Regardless of whether Alexander noticed it or not, he tried his best to eliminate this possibility. Under his father's persuasion, Alexander still made a decision. He knew that Madanzo liked Helen, and that Helen attracted the affection of 2 men at the same time. It seemed like she wouldn't reject anyone. Thus, Alexander decided to find an opportunity to express his feelings and bless Helen and Madanzo. The next day, Amon took the wroth beast away. Without saying anything, he released the monster back into the mountains. Alexander went to visit Helen, and it just so happened that Madanzo was there. While talking and laughing, the young prince suddenly said to Helen, "You came to Macedonia to find the hero in your heart. In fact, the hero is right in front of you. Is there anyone here who is braver than Madanzo? You two have quite a good impression of each other. If you can get together, I will send the most sincere blessing on behalf of the kingdom of Macedonia." This sentence almost made Madanzo blush, but Helen looked very surprised. She turned around and went into the house with a shy look, as if she didn't know how to answer. Alexander chatted with Madanzo for a while, and even made a few jokes about him and Helen before he got up and left. That night, Helen sat alone under the lamp and said to herself again, "Actually, I prefer the handsome Prince Alexander. A powerful warrior is just a personal strength, but a king who conquers many states is the real hero." Although she spoke in a low voice, her maid heard it. The maid was sent by Alexander, and this sentence naturally reached Alexander's ears. However, Alexander didn't respond and pretended that he didn't know at all. He gradually reduced his contact with Helen. Even if he visited Helen occasionally, it was with Madanzo. And Madanzo took advantage of the situation and met Helen more frequently. Finally, one day, he spent the night at Helen's house. The next morning, when the energetic and radiant Madanzo came back while humming a little tune, he happened to run into Amon sitting in the courtyard. Aristotle's mansion wasn't small, and there was a courtyard specially empty for Amon and Madanzo. Usually no one would disturb them. Amon put a few chairs in the courtyard and sat in the middle. Seeing this, Madanzo was stunned. Seeing that there was no one around, he asked awkwardly, "My God, were you waiting for me?" Amon looked up at him and said without batting an eyelid, "Desire is one of the forces that move this world. It's just a matter of how we face it. To awaken the power of the origin, the first test is to face desire, and this test will continue from beginning to end." He obviously meant something. Metatro chuckled and said nothing. Amon asked again, "How did it feel last night?" Madanzo was a little embarrassed and whispered, "I've never felt so happy before." Amon's tone sank slightly. "Do you really think it was her?" What did that mean? His voice carried a message. In fact, last night, the girl named Helen wasn't in her room at all, and Madanzo didn't spend the night with anyone. As the goddess of love and beauty, Aphrodite had many unique and clever methods. For example, her summoning magic was something that even Amon didn't notice. Last night, she used an illusion that could charm the soul, making Madanzo think that he was having sex with Helen. This method was very clever, and even Amon couldn't help but admire it. Madanzo didn't use any means to resist, and he experienced unprecedented pleasure. If Aphrodite used this method to seduce men in the world, almost no one could resist. Amon questioned Madanzo, not because he was blaming him for spending the night, but because he understood. Madanzo lowered his head and replied, "I know. My God, do you want to blame me? I didn't lose anything, and on the contrary, I'm quite grateful to her." Amon seemed to want to laugh, but he held it back and said with a straight face, "You really enjoyed it, and now you're waiting to be beaten." Madanzo took a step back and said in surprise, "Who will beat me?" "Amon, me." Madanzo, "You? Why?" Amon said in a low voice, "You'll know in a while. Someone will come to settle the score for this night. You should know who Helen is, so why did you interfere?" Madanzo quietly took another step back and replied in a low voice, "The reason is that Helen is really cute, the most charming woman I've ever seen. She also took the initiative to express her affection to me, so I have no reason to refuse." Amon asked, "If she is Helen, it's nothing. You don't have to say this reason, what else?" Madanzo finally raised his head, blinked his eyes and replied, "If Alexander is infatuated with Helen, he will listen to whatever she says. This may not be a bad thing for the kingdom of Macedonia, as the future heir has the love of the goddess, but it is not a good thing for you. I'm afraid she wants to use Alexander to force you away. Your cooperation with Zeus ended with you leaving without reason, and your attempt to find evidence failed." Amon smiled bitterly. "A fool who thinks he's smart. Is this the reason?" Madanzo replied very honestly, "Of course, not only that, there is also the first reason, which I've just answered." Amon suddenly sighed. "People who want to find trouble will find trouble no matter what, and not everyone is a fool. I know in my heart that she is already at my door." As soon as he finished speaking, a servant outside the courtyard shouted, "Mr. Amon, Miss Helen and His Royal Highness Prince Alexander are looking for you." Amon said loudly, "Please come in, the seats are ready." Madanzo then realized that no wonder Amon would put 6 chairs in the courtyard. Helen came, and her eyes were still red. Alexander also came, and he looked a little embarrassed. It seemed that he was called by Helen. Aristotle also came in with the two of them. Amon was not a rude person, but he was not pretentious either. When he saw them come in, he did not stand up to welcome them, but deliberately waved to Aristotle and said, "Sir, please take a seat." As for whether the others sat or not, Amon did not care. Anyway, the seats were there, and he could do as he pleased. Madanzo did not sit down, but stood in the same place with his head down. Alexander and Helen did not sit down either. Helen took a step forward and bowed to Amon with a wronged expression. "Mr. Amon, I heard that His Royal Highness Alexander respects you very much, and Madanzo is also your disciple, so I would like to ask you to uphold justice today." Amon gently waved his hand. "Beautiful girl, please don't be sad, just say what you have to say." Helen lowered her head and pulled on Alexander's sleeve. Alexander coughed lightly and looked at Aristotle with a pleading gaze. It seemed that this matter was not something that they could speak of, so they asked Aristotle for help. Aristotle's expression was a little helpless, and he said with slight embarrassment, "It's like this, Mr. Madanzo forcibly stayed in Miss Helen's room that night. I won't go into the details, but the servants and maids can testify. Madanzo is a hero, and Miss Helen could not resist his strength, but..." Before he finished speaking, a paw sound was heard. Amon waved his hand, and a translucent long whip flew out from his sleeve. This was the whip that Imral used to shepherd sheep and Amon's horsewhip. It made a beautiful and exaggerated arc in the air, and the tip of the whip ruthlessly struck Madanzo's back. The whip was as sharp as a knife, and Madanzo's clothes were cut open like paper. This was not a light blow. Alexander hurriedly rushed forward to stop it and shouted, "Mr. Amon, please calm down. Please don't do this." Madanzo let out a short cry of pain, and Helen also stepped forward with open arms. "Mr. Amon, please don't punish him like this." Amon conveniently kept the whip, and said with an angry expression, "I beat him. Does it hurt your heart? What a kind-hearted girl. Madanzo must pay the price for his actions. This is the result of his choice." Aphrodite secretly cursed Amon in her heart, but on the surface she said sweetly, "Please listen to Mr. Aristotle's words first. It won't be too late to be angry." Amon turned to Aristotle and said, "Sir, you haven't finished speaking?" Aristotle had to continue to explain. "The kind girl Helen thinks that she is also responsible, and does not want to accuse Madanzo. She only came to ask you and me to uphold justice." Amon asked again, "Then how do you think Madanzo should be punished?" Aristotle thought for a moment. "Madanzo is a noble warrior. If Miss Helen does not object, according to the custom of the city of Macedonia, we can call the representatives of the citizens to carry out a potsherd vote to decide whether or not he should be listed as an unwelcome person and banished from the city." The so-called potsherd vote meant that when a meeting was held, each person would have a potsherd drawn on it to express support or agreement, and then vote by secret ballot. This practice was first carried out in the city of Yaran, and later spread to various places in Heaton. Madanzo forcibly stayed in Helen's room at night, and Helen was a guest of Prince Alexander. Madanzo's action was also disrespectful to the kingdom of Macedonia. What Aristotle said was the usual way to punish a noble. The punishment was not very heavy, but if Madanzo was banished in this way, and Madanzo was brought here by Amon, then it would not be good for Amon to stay. Amon said bitterly, "He is not welcome anywhere. I hope he disappears from the world as soon as possible." "Madanzo, let me ask you, did you open the door or did she open the door?" Madanzo, "I opened the door." Amon, "Did you take the initiative or did she take the initiative?" Madanzo, "I also took the initiative." Amon, "Did she say she was unwilling?" Madanzo, "She said no a few times, but she did not say she was unwilling." Amon, "No buts. Who was the one who closed the door?" Madanzo, "She was the one who closed the door." Amon then said to Aristotle, "In this case, I have another suggestion to punish Madanzo. I wonder if it is okay?" Aristotle hurriedly said, "I just said one of the common punishments. If Mr. Amon has any suggestions, please say it." Amon thought for a moment and said, "No matter how we punish Madanzo, we have to be fair to Miss Helen. Who can judge that our punishment is fair?" Helen finally couldn't help but say, "I invited someone. Her judgment will definitely be fair." In the presence of Amon and Aristotle, it was rather surprising that Helen had invited someone to judge the case. At this time, everyone in the courtyard couldn't help but look at the door because a person had walked in. It was as if he had suddenly appeared from the void and stepped through the door. Chapter 328. "It's you?" Amon asked in a deep voice. "It's me," the woman replied faintly. From her appearance, one could guess that she was a deity, and from the way she closed her eyes, Amon guessed that she was the Olympian goddess of justice and fairness, Themis. But this was not enough to surprise Amon, and he even lost his composure. This goddess was very beautiful, and although she was not as charming as Helen, she was gorgeous and dignified. Amon actually recognized her. He had seen her in the mortal world a long time ago. The Olympian goddess of justice and fairness, Themis, was not one of the 12 main gods of today, but Themis's status was not lower than that of Apollo, Athena, Aphrodite, and the others. In the myths and legends, she was the second wife of Zeus, the father of the gods, besides Hera. In the myths and legends of the mortal world, Themis's seat among the gods in heaven was right next to Zeus, and she was the judge of the differences between the gods. The myths of the mortal world were, of course, not quite the same as the actual situation in heaven, and people only deconstructed and interpreted it in a way that they could understand. But it was precisely because of such myths that some things that happened in the past might not make Zeus happy, but he could not say anything about Ammon. In fact, Themis's status was because of her identity. Zeus defeated the original god Unos and created his own Olympian heaven by means of fusion, and most of the gods of Olympus were still there. Themis was the representative of the ancient gods before the War of the Gods. These gods were neutral in the War of the Gods and still possessed great power. Zeus achieved the so-called God of the Gods achievement, and the ancient goddess of justice and fairness, Themis, also hoped to seek higher achievements. She once went to the mortal world in the form of a new soul, and as a mortal in a foreign divine realm, she gained new knowledge. At that time, she was born on the outskirts of Montefiore, Igut, the daughter of a farmer, and her name was Themis. The first time Ammon met her was in a luxurious brothel in Montefiore. At that time, Miss Phi's beauty had spread far and wide, and she was known as the flower of Montefiore. She became a prostitute because she wanted to avenge her father who had died unjustly. At that time, as a general, Ammon made use of this matter to wreak havoc in Montefiore and avenge Miss Phi. He then ransomed her out of the brothel and took her away. Later, Miss Phi and Ammon's disciple, John, became a couple and also received the guidance of the Origin power. Later, in the battle against the Assyrian Empire's giant legion, John unfortunately died. Even though Miss Phi knew that she could not save John, she still charged into the enemy's formation and died on the battlefield. When Miss Phi died, Ammon was not present. Instead, he was recuperating in eternity. At that time, he had just become a god. If Ammon was present, he might or might not have discovered anything because at that time, his realm was actually very far from Miss Phi's. But if Ammon was in Olympus at that time, he would have clearly learned that the goddess of justice and fairness, Themis, had returned to heaven after a period of cultivation in the mortal world. Miss Phi and Themis, the pronunciation of their names only differed by one syllable, which could be considered a mysterious coincidence. When Ammon saw this god with his own eyes, he triggered the imprint in his soul and recognized her. He was very surprised and also a little excited. He then asked in a deep voice, "Since it's you, why don't you open your eyes and look at me?" Her eyes were still closed and she replied calmly, "Closing my eyes does not mean that I'm blind, I just don't want to see the face and identity of the contender. I won't waver because of selfishness, I won't be tempted, and I won't succumb to force. This has always been the case when I'm the arbiter." The external appearance of a god was her internal state of mind. Since Themis had already expressed her stance, Helen invited her to be the arbiter, and she did not ask who the contender was. Ammon nodded and said, "I believe that your judgment will definitely be fair, then please listen to my suggestion on how to punish Medanzo." Themis said expressionlessly, "Speak." Ammon pointed at Medanzo and Helen, and said to Themis, "Since the arbiter is you, I don't need to explain what happened. I just want to ask Miss Helen, in what capacity did she come to ask me and Aristotle to give her justice?" Themis said to Helen, "Young lady, please answer for yourself." Helen replied, "I who is standing here, am an ordinary woman who came from afar to Macedonia, and I also accepted the invitation of Prince Alexander." Ammon gently stroked the back of his hand and said, "That's easy. As far as I know, His Royal Highness has blessed you and Medanzo. Of course, you can accept or not accept this blessing. This is just His Royal Highness' attitude. You have also told Medanzo that he is your hero. And Medanzo has also told me that a girl like Helen is like his dream lover. So now, my punishment for Medanzo is to let him officially marry you." Medanzo's legs went soft, and he almost fell to the ground. If Helen was Helen, of course, there was no problem with Ammon's suggestion, and Medanzo would not be unwilling. But now that he knew that Helen was up to no good, and wanted to drive a wedge between Ammon and the kingdom of Macedonia, and her identity was the goddess of love and beauty of the Olympian divine system. If Madanzo still wanted to marry her, it would be a bit like courting death. Aristotle, who was at the side, had a strange expression on his face. The honest elder wanted to laugh, but he tried his best to hold it in. He nodded and said, "Yes. How can we always think of things in a bad light? As long as Miss Helen is willing, this is the best ending." Madanzo quickly interrupted. "Sir, Atling shouted. "You what you? Now is the time to judge how to punish you. Listen to me honestly." Helen interrupted again. "Of course this is a good suggestion, but," Ammon waved his hand and interrupted her again. "Miss Helen, don't worry, I haven't finished my words. My suggestion will definitely be very fair to you. Madanzo is a noble warrior, and his identity is also recognized in the Kingdom of Macedonia. If he officially marries you, I will ask King Philip II to grant you a noble identity and a title." Alessandra quickly nodded and said, No problem, leave it to me." The young prince was very intelligent. When he saw Themis enter the courtyard in that manner, he vaguely guessed the identity of Helen and Themis. Helen once said that she came from the city of Cyprus, and that Aphrodite was the patron goddess of Cyprus. Such a beautiful girl was most likely the goddess of love and beauty herself. Themis suddenly appeared out of thin air, and stepped into the courtyard. She should be a god, and there was an 80% to 90% chance that she was the legendary goddess of fairness and justice. Helen being able to invite this goddess as an arbitrator was equivalent to exposing her own identity. Alessandra realized that this was a dispute between deities, so he stood at the side and did not even breathe heavily. Only now did he carefully interrupt. Aphrodite also did not expect Ammon to make such a decision and sell out his follower. He really had the guts to let his oracle marry the goddess of love and beauty of the Olympian pantheon. Was he not afraid of offending the entire Olympian pantheon? Although there was nothing wrong with the suggestion, Aphrodite did not expect Ammon to make it. Helen blinked and said, "Thank you, Mr. Ammon, thank you, Your Highness. I came to Macedonia to find my hero, and I am also responsible for what happened yesterday. I am willing to marry Madanzo, but if Madanzo marries me, he will stay in Macedonia forever, become a subject of Macedonia, and have the faith of this place." She was deliberately making things difficult for Madanzo. If he married Helen, he would have to be a Hiltonian, and he would have to believe in the Hiltonian god. Ammon smiled and shook his head. "Kind girl, you are wrong. Madanzo is a warrior of Babylon, a general of Igut, a hero of Cologne, and an honored guest of Macedonia. Regardless of the customs or laws of any place, marrying a wife is marrying a wife. Once you marry him, you will have to serve him as his wife. You will have to manage the household and bear children for him. Without your husband's permission, you are not allowed to leave the city. Because you have just answered my question. You are afraid that his identity is not someone else, but Miss Helen. Mr. Aristotle, you are the most knowledgeable scholar here, am I right?" Aristotle smiled. "The customs and laws of any country are like this, and Macedonia is no exception. This is the common custom of the human world. But Mr. Ammon, you have not finished speaking, please continue. Madanzo is your disciple, and you are now making a decision as a judge of justice. You still need to express your stance." Ammon nodded. "Yes, if Helen decides to marry Madanzo, she will have to follow her husband's faith and respect her husband's elders. I will also treat her fairly and treat her as my disciple." Arbiter with his eyes closed, "Please make a decision. Is this decision fair?" Helen waved her hand. "Wait." Ammon frowned slightly. "Don't tell me you want to object?" Helen. "Yes, I object. You should ask for my permission." Ammon smiled. "Yes, we should ask for your permission. We can't force your family to marry Madanzo. This is just a suggestion to resolve this matter, and let the arbiter you invited decide whether it is fair or not. If you refuse, it is because of your kindness that you will no longer hold Madanzo responsible. As for the cause and effect of the matter, I think you and the arbiter are well aware of it." At this time, Themis suddenly opened her eyes. Madanzo, who had been secretly looking at her, asked in surprise, "Our arbiter, Why did you open your eyes? Themis replied, when I open my eyes, it means that there is no need to make a ruling. Amon's suggestion is fair, but it puts me in a dilemma, so I have to open my eyes. Helen and Madanzo are unmarried, but they have a good impression of each other. Whether the good impression is real or fake, there is no flaw on the surface. Metatro stayed overnight in Helen's room, but he didn't barge in. Helen's previous actions indicated that she had accepted this hero. If it was a mortal, Amon would let Madanzo officially marry Helen, and ask the Kingdom of Macedonia to grant Helen noble status. It would be fair no matter who made the ruling. Helen could agree and have the right to refuse. In fact, Helen had already agreed just now, but she took the opportunity to make things difficult for Amon. But Amon was ruthless enough. He directly followed the customs of the human world and treated Helen like a disciple. If Helen was Helen, there was no problem with Amon's conditions. But what about Aphrodite? Did she have to leave the Olympian system and join the kingdom of angels? She only had one choice, and that was to quickly disappear from the human world. Why didn't Themis want to make a ruling? Amon's suggestion was fair in the human world, but it was not fair to Madanzo because Helen was a god and could disappear and return to Olympus at any time. Helen turned around and asked, Themis, are you not going to make a ruling anymore? Themis also said directly, Aphrodite, this is a farce. You think you are smart, but you are actually stupid. It is unfair for you to play tricks on Madanzo as a god. Last night, Helen as a mortal did not exist. Go leave this place. This is the suggestion I made when I opened my eyes. The two goddesses called each other's names and exposed their identities. Alexander quickly knelt down, and Aristotle also stood up and bowed. Madanzo had a strange expression. It was unknown whether he wanted to cry or laugh. Amon stood where he was without moving, just watching quietly. Aphrodite glared at Themis but did not say anything. She stomped her foot and disappeared. Themis also did not say anything. She turned around and walked out of the courtyard, just like how she came. Amon shouted behind her, It is not easy for us to meet, and I finally recognize you. Don't you want to chat a little longer? Themis stopped and did not turn around. She only replied indifferently, Amon, the flower of Montefiore is not clear about her origins. That is just a part of my training experience. I should thank you, but everything is over now that she is dead. Themis has already used her life to repay me. I just want to remind you of one thing. Do you still remember him? Have you looked for him? Amon sighed. John. I once swore in front of the graves of John and Themis that if their souls are reborn in the human world, I will continue to guide them. Now it seems that Themis's soul has not been reborn in the human world. As for John, I am sorry to say that I have not found that person yet. Themis sneered. Not yet. Are you afraid that Q has forgotten about him? Have you looked for him? I am here today to tell you. I will find that person and give him another kind of guidance. This is also the vow I made when I first returned to the Olympian kingdom. Amon wanted to say something else, but he hesitated. From what Themis said, she wanted to guide the reborn soul of John into the Olympian kingdom. This vow was completely understandable. However, Amon had also made the same vow in front of John's grave, so it seemed that this would conflict with her. There was a hint of blame in Themis's tone towards Amon. Because of all the disciples in the Garden of Eden, only John had died accidentally. When the gods guided the messengers in the human world, it also required the guided person to be willing. If the reborn soul was more willing to accept Themis's guidance, Amon could not interfere. But if she did so, Zeus might not be happy. After all, in the legends, Themis was Zeus's second wife. Thinking about it carefully, Themis's tone actually implied that she wanted to fight with Amon or Zeus. She also wanted to seek a higher realm, and guiding the reborn soul contained this intention, or rather, a method. Amon thought of so many things in a flash, but Themis had already walked out of the courtyard and disappeared. Amon looked at the place where Themis disappeared, lost in thought. Madanzo, Alexander, Aristotle, and the others walked out of the courtyard. He did not greet them, only thinking about a question in his heart. In the life of Themis, the flower of Montefiore, what did Themis seek to prove? Themis was not the incarnation of Themis, but the god herself. who became an ordinary living being through the rebirth of a soul. Amon did not do such a thing, but Artemis and Anu had done it, becoming Shueding and Goliath respectively. Anu wanted to prove that he had surpassed the realm of the god of creation. And if he failed, Anu did not break through to a higher realm, but at least he understood that he was on the wrong path. Artemis's search was successful. She wanted to prove that she had reached the realm of the creator. And after Shueding disappeared, Artemis, who returned to heaven, had the achievements of the creator. Shueding was once trapped in the body of a cat for several years, unable to break free, and in the end, it was Amon who helped her. As for Themis's situation, it was completely different. The goddess of fairness and justice had long reached the pinnacle of the creator. Before the battle of the gods in the Olympus pantheon, her temple had the power to issue the oracle of Delphi. Later, Zeus merged with the Olympus pantheon, and Themis also wanted to seek a higher realm. As Themis, coming to the human world was part of her training experience, but it was difficult to say whether this experience was a success or a failure. After Themis died, the goddess of fairness and justice returned to the Olympus pantheon. She did not break through to a higher realm, but her experience in the human world was not without gains. Whether it was for gods or mortals, a valuable experience was a kind of wealth in itself. Themis abandoned the prejudices that the gods had, and was reborn as a human with a pure soul. She witnessed everything in the foreign world again, and was fortunate enough to receive another kind of guidance. She was already very lucky. There was an ancient question that the sages often asked in the plaza: if luck could be replicated, would people still be able to achieve the same success if they changed their identity and situation? This question had a different meaning to the gods. For any god to achieve transcendence and eternal life, it was a rare great fortune in the human world, and there were many opportunities that could not be replicated. If the gods abandoned their identity as gods and tried again like mortals, could they achieve the same success? This was a huge question, and the answer was almost impossible. Chapter 329. Even those with high achievements in the mortal world like Goliath did not transcend eternal life again. Those who were both lucky and unfortunate like Batet were only one step away. As for Ms. Phi, she received guidance from Amon, which was considered a rare blessing in life, but she was still far from transcending eternal life in this life. But this confirmation did not hinder the original achievements of the gods. After this life ended, they would still regain their identity as gods, and they would also have more knowledge. It was precisely during this process that Artemis broke through the achievement of the creator. Suppose there really was a situation where a god came to the mortal world in the form of a new soul, and became immortal, and achieved the achievement of transcending eternal life in this life. What would the result be? There would not be another god in the world, and he would still return to the eternal life and restore his original identity. He would be able to integrate all the magic he had obtained in this life, and he would be stronger than before in all aspects. As far as Amon knew, after Zeus transcended eternal life, he had returned to the mortal world more than once in the form of a new soul. Zeus did not enjoy eternal life in the divine kingdom, but he constantly went through the trials of life, so he left behind too many legends. Zeus came to the mortal world again and again, and when the mortal's life ended, he returned to the divine kingdom again and again. That was until one time, when Zeus, as a newly born mortal, obtained the achievement of transcending eternal life. It was under this great opportunity that he sought to prove the so-called God of God's realm. Today Zeus, Marduk, and Amon had all achieved similar achievements, but everyone had different opportunities to reach this step. After Zeus achieved such an achievement, he slashed off his incarnation, and became King Gabata to resist the invasion of Pots. This was an even more mysterious method, and even Amon had never tried it. As Ms. Phi in this life, although she did not break through to a higher level, it was also an important experience and accumulation for this goddess. With Themis's status, she still wanted to go on such an adventure. She obviously hoped to have the same achievements as Zeus or Amon. Perhaps she already had this wish when the War of the Gods broke out, and this became an inexplicable fate between her, Zeus, and Amon. She told Amon that she was also going to search for John's soul to be reborn. She did not simply want to snatch his disciple, but there was another mysterious meaning behind it. Finally understanding the cause and effect, Aman could only smile bitterly. His vow was not to become a god like he was now. Otherwise, he would not have come to the Heaton Peninsula, agreed to cooperate with Zeus, and suffered the hostility and harassment of the Olympian gods. While Aman stood in the yard in a daze, the two gods of Olympus were talking to each other. Apollo said to Yelena, "Goddess of wisdom, is this your idea for the love god?" "Themis is right, I don't think this is a brilliant plan, but more like a farce." Yelena asked in return, "Don't you find it surprising that Aphrodite's method of seducing two men in the human world turned out to be like this? In another situation, those two men would definitely turn against each other." Apollo snorted and said, "In another situation? But you should know that Aman is there, and Medanzo and Alexander are not simple characters. Why did Zeus choose Alexander to fulfill his wish, and why did he look for Aman to cooperate? Aphrodite's trip to the human world this time, other than embarrassing the gods, she did not achieve anything else. This is what makes Aman so powerful. You couldn't see it at the time, but you will understand it later. Otherwise, how could I lose to him?" Yelena smiled and said, "Don't worry, this is just the beginning. You lost to him, but it doesn't mean that I will lose to him. This kind of thing is not useless. People's feelings are always accumulating. When Aman brings 1, 2, 3 troubles in a row, conflicts will erupt." At this time, Aphrodite had already returned to Olympus and happened to appear next to Yelena. Hearing this, she immediately asked, "Goddess of wisdom, do you have any follow-up plans?" Yelena nodded and said, "Yes, I still have a plan. Aphrodite, this time, you did not use your best method to make those two men fall in love with you. Maybe they were willing to love you before they discovered your identity, but they did not unknowingly fall in love with you, and are willing to make a choice for this love." Aphrodite frowned and said, "Yelena, you should know that the question that the love god cannot answer is precisely, what is love?" Yelena nodded again and said, "Yes, I am very clear." Then the former Anunnaki goddess of youth and love, Murin, also cannot answer this question, right? Aphrodite was stunned. What does this have to do with her? Yelena smiled confidently and said, "Don't ask what it has to do with her first. You should answer why you did not use your best method, whether it was against Alexander or Medanzo. You did not shoot that arrow." Aphrodite frowned and said, "Didn't you tell me to go to the human world as a girl?" Yelena said, "Yes, you did the right thing, but it was not good enough. Now that Helen is gone, you are still the goddess of love of the Olympian gods. I will tell you what to do." Yelena whispered to Aphrodite again. As for what ideas she came up with, the world and the other gods did not know. After Helen left, Alexander also understood that he had met the god of love and beauty, and he did not think that his words and actions had offended this goddess. Although he already knew the purpose of Aphrodite's visit, the young prince could not help but feel an inexplicable sense of melancholy when he recalled the past. Before Helen left, because he was busy with the affairs of the kingdom, the time he spent with Medanzo had gradually decreased. Often Medanzo went to Helen alone, and after Helen left, the number of times they met was even less. On this day, Alexander accompanied his father back from the outskirts of the barracks, and Philip II suddenly reminded him, "My child, recently you have been accompanying me to help me deal with the affairs of the kingdom. It has been a long time since you visited your teacher, right? At present, there are a lot of things that have to be done, so let the officials do what needs to be done. There is nothing else to do during this period of time, so you should go to your teacher more often. When you really have to shoulder the heavy burden in the future, you will not have so much leisure time. Your sister is about to get married, and the Kingdom of Macedonia is preparing for her wedding. I have invited many guests to attend with their beautiful daughters, including the princesses of various states. When the time comes, you can choose your beloved girl from among them." Alexander asked, "My sister's wedding, you have invited the princesses of various kingdoms to attend. Is it specially arranged for me?" Philip II replied, "Yes, you are already 20 years old, and as the heir of the kingdom, you must also consider marriage. But I will not force you. Who you choose is up to your liking." After entering the city, Philip II's carriage returned to the palace, while Alexander went directly to Aristotle's mansion. Since the last time the prince went out incognito, he had a habit of walking through the streets and alleys in casual clothes. Ordinary people could not recognize him, but the servants in Aristotle's mansion were very familiar with him, and there was no need for him to announce his arrival. Alexander, accompanied by 3 plainclothed guards, walked to Aristotle's house. Along the way, he was still thinking about what his father had said. He had a sister who was 2 years younger than him, and she would be married in a few months. The person who married the princess was the most important lord of the original Turkic kingdom, and this was a typical political marriage. The Turkic kingdom was located in the northeast of Macedonia, across a strait from the original Hittite kingdom. After the Potsdam Empire destroyed the Hittite kingdom, and before attacking Hilton, they annexed the Turkic kingdom and established the Turkic province. Later, the Potsdam army was repelled, and the Turkic province broke away from Potsdam's rule. Part of its territory was seized by Macedonia, and most of the other territories were divided by lords of various sizes, and the original Turkic kingdom was never restored. Through the arrangement of this political marriage, one could also see Philip II's intentions. Sparta had become independent, and only a few city-states of the Eurone League were still resisting stubbornly, and the unification of the Hilton Peninsula was irreversible. Philip II was also preparing a plan to attack the Potsdam Empire, and first of all, he had to integrate the territory of the original Turkic kingdom, and try to obtain the support of the most local forces. Alexander's sister had not yet seen her fiancé, but the marriage had been decided, and she had to marry him even if she did not want to. Alexander thought of himself again. His father's attitude towards him was much more tolerant, and he would invite distinguished guests from various states to attend the wedding with their beautiful daughters, allowing Alexander to choose his sweetheart from among these princesses. But did he really have a choice? Could he find his sweetheart just by glancing around the wedding? But with Alexander's status, Philip II had already made the most generous arrangements. What sort of girl would he take a fancy to? Could she be any better than Helen? With these thoughts in mind, he had already arrived in front of Aristotle's house. Alexander stopped and raised his head, just in time to see a girl. His heart seemed to have been shot by an invisible arrow, and he froze there, unable to recover for a long time. The girl wore a pure white cotton dress with indigo stripes. Although it was the color of a commoner's clothing, it perfectly outlined her dainty figure. She stood in the spring breeze, her beautiful hair and dress fluttering gently. Her face was like the bright sunshine, as if it could dissipate all the haze in one's heart, and her eyes were like a clear spring under the starry sky, gentle and mysterious. Perhaps it could not be said that she was more beautiful than Helen, but Alexander's feeling was completely different. When he first saw Helen, he was very amazed, and he exclaimed in his heart that there could be such a charming woman in the world. But at this moment, when he saw this girl, it was as if a long-buried memory that even he did not know was awakened in the depths of his soul. It was an aura of desire. If he saw this girl at his sister's wedding, Alexander would not hesitate to say to his father, "That's her, I want to choose her." Was this love at first sight? Then what was the so-called love? Alexander did not even know her, and he did not know where she came from, whether she was gentle or violent, kind or evil. It was this feeling or reaction that touched his soul, as if it had been branded with an indelible mark, and his entire body and mind resonated with it. What Alexander didn't know was that Aphrodite was holding a transparent bow in her hand, and shooting an invisible arrow in a place that no one could see. Just as Alexander raised his head and saw the girl, Aphrodite's arrow hit him. The girl was going to the same place as Alexander, and she said to the gatekeeper, "Please inform him that my name is Yun Nam Na, and I wish to see Mr. Aman." The gatekeeper hurriedly replied, "Please wait a moment, I'll go in and report." At this moment, the girl seemed to sense something and turned to look at Alexander. Her gaze became very sharp, as if it could see through a person's heart. But Alexander felt that her eyes were so beautiful that they could move one's soul. However, to Alexander's disappointment, the girl's gaze swept past him, and then looked into an unknown distance, and she frowned deeply as if she was angry. She looked so charming even when she was angry, but what was she looking at? Alexander could not help but turn his head in the direction of her gaze, but there was nothing in the distance, not even a bird could be seen in the sky. Of course, Alexander could not find anything, but Yun Nam Na could sense the strange arrow that Aphrodite had secretly shot out. Looking at Alexander's expression, she also realized what had happened. If there was anyone who understood this trick of Aphrodite the best, it was of course Murin, the former goddess of youth and love of the Anunnaki divine clan. Alexander did not find anything and turned his gaze back to the girl. Just as the gatekeeper entered the door to report, he saw Amon personally come out of the door, opened his arms to the girl and said, "Yun Nam Na, why are you here?" Before the gatekeeper had time to report, Amon personally came out to greet her. Yun Nam Na walked up the steps and naturally threw herself into Amon's arms. She put her hands around his waist and said, "I'm here to see you, can't I? I know your identity here, so I came to report like an ordinary person. I didn't disturb you, did I?" Amon put his arm around the girl's shoulders and laughed. "I heard your footsteps and came out to greet you. Come in and talk." Of course, he also saw Alexander outside the door, and with his arm around the girl's waist he turned around and said, "Your Royal Highness, you also have time to come over today? Madanzo is out, and Mr. Aristotle is in the study." Alexander could not help but ask, "Mr. Amon, this girl?" Amon smiled. "Her name is Yun Nam Na, and she specially came to the Kingdom of Macedonia to see me." After that, Amon went in with his arm around Yun Nam Na, leaving Alexander outside the door. An inexplicable sense of melancholy hit Alexander's heart again. He could not describe what he was feeling. From a purely rational point of view, this feeling of melancholy was ridiculous. He only took a glance at the girl, but it left such a deep impression on his soul, and his body and mind were indescribably shocked. But he also saw the girl and Amon being so intimate, so there was no need to guess her relationship with Amon. The attendant behind him whispered, "Your Royal Highness, let's go in. Aren't you here to see teacher?" Alexander replied with a dull tone, "I suddenly feel a little uncomfortable today, and I want to go back." Then he turned around and was about to leave. At this time, Madanzo happened to come in from outside, and was about to greet Alexander. Alexander stepped forward and grabbed his sleeve. "You came at the right time. I have something to ask you." Madanzo asked curiously, "What's the matter? Why are you so nervous?" Alexander asked, "Who is Yun Nam Na? I just saw a girl who called herself Yun Nam Na, and she came to see Mr. Amon." Madanzo was also shocked. "What? She's here? This is going to be interesting. Thank you for your reminder, but I'd better stay away today." Alexander asked, "What's wrong? Do you know her? Who is she?" Madanzo did not speak, but his voice sounded in Alexander's soul. "Your Royal Highness, haven't you heard of the legend of Igut? That Yun Nam Na is the wife of God Amon in the legend of Igut, Mute, and the original god of the continent Murin." Alexander nodded, and his expression was indescribably strange. Madanzo asked curiously, "Your Royal Highness, what's wrong with you?" Alexander hurriedly waved his hand and said, "No, nothing. I'm just a little tired, and I want to go back and rest quickly." Alisanda's departure left Metatro somewhat baffled. And in Aju's small courtyard, Yun Nam Na's expression was not very good, and she was scolding Amon. "You ask me why I came here? Although this is the realm of Olympus, it is also a kingdom on earth. Why can't I come as an ordinary person? I don't know what happened here, and I'm just concerned about you." Amon just smiled apologetically and said, "What did you hear?" Yun Nam Na reached out and pinched Amon's waist and replied, "Since you came here, you must have met Artemis. Forget it, you used to be old friends. That day, I heard your song in heaven, praising the goddess of youth and love, and I thought you were singing for me. But then I heard a story. Aphrodite, the goddess of youth and love believed in by the Hydonians, shot Amon with an arrow of love, and Amon sang loudly for her. The goddess of love came to earth in the form of a beautiful girl, Helen. Amon vowed to bring her back to the kingdom of angels, but he angered Zeus, and now the lords of the two heavens are going to fight. After hearing such a story, how can I not worry about your safety? Shouldn't I come immediately?" Amon still smiled apologetically and said, You Namna, you know that it's a rumor. It's just a story made up by bored people. Would you believe it? Chapter 330. Aman chuckled in a very simple and honest manner. Of course I welcome you here. But the person who made this rumor was very accurate. Even if you knew it was a rumor, you would still come. Someone predicted that you would come. Yun Namna's expression had softened. She said in a coquettish tone, as long as you're happy. Aman grabbed her wrist and pulled her closer. Of course I'm happy. But I want to ask you a question. You mentioned the arrow of love just now. What is it? Yun Namna replied, I didn't understand it at first. I thought it was just a title. But I understood it just now. You should have also sensed it. Someone was shot by an arrow outside the door. It was actually a feeling of temptation. Aman nodded. Yes, I sensed it. Someone was secretly casting a spell on Alexander. When I went out to greet him, his mind was completely focused on you. You used to be the goddess of youth and love. You should know some tricks better than me. What is going on? Can the goddess of love make one person fall in love with another? If so, can you do it too? Yun Namna smiled bitterly. As the goddess of love, or the angel of youth and love, the question I can't answer is exactly what is love. I have heard countless prayers in the temple. People are asking the gods to bless them and make another person fall in love with them. But I have never used this method, except for one time. Aman asked. Which time? Lion Taro King or Enkidu? Yun Namna gave him a slap. What nonsense are you talking about? That person was just a silly boy who didn't know anything. He had just come out of the mountains and came to the outside world. He wasn't as smart as he is now. I said I was a shepherdess and he believed me. He even accompanied me to find a lost lamb. But he didn't know that the lamb was himself. Aman smiled. Oh, you're talking about me. Did you shoot me too? Yun Namna said angrily. If that is called the arrow of love, then I suspect that the arrow hit your knee. You didn't react at all. Aman smiled. Who said that? I reacted. I was very tempted. Then, she softened her tone and said, but something's not right. The Alexander the First saw just now is obviously different from me at that time. Murin explained, everyone is different. Who knows what you are thinking in your heart? At that time, you were practicing the power of two sides. You just passed the test of devil's temptation. You weren't affected by me. Otherwise, you wouldn't have helped me win the bet with Enril. I knew it clearly at that time. But Alexander is not you. Now you should understand why the goddess of love can't answer what love is. Because even the gods can't decide it. The arrow of love may have nothing to do with love. Aman shook his head. I still don't understand. Murin narrowed her eyes. Can you tell me why a person would fall in love with another person? What is this so-called love? Is it the cause or the result? Is there a necessity? Is there a should and shouldn't? Is there a possibility and an impossibility? Aman blinked. Well, I can't answer that. Murin pointed at Aman's chest. If even you can't answer that, then no one can. Aman said. Let's talk about the arrow just now. You were standing next to Alexander. You should have sensed it more clearly than me. Murin said. I've already explained. It was a feeling of being tempted. It happened when he saw me. It can awaken the desire in the heart and resonate with the pursuit of the soul. There is a strange feeling in the body and mind that it is what you want. It seems to have left a mark in the soul, so he can't forget it. Alexander is just a mortal. He might have been thinking about such a question, and the arrow imprinted his soul. Aman blinked again. After beating around the bush, you might as well simply say that he fell in love with you. Yun Namna smiled bitterly again. To be more precise, he fell in love with me. That feeling of being tempted has merged with the desire of the soul. That arrow was successful. Aman frowned slightly. Was that a trap? If it was the effect of divine magic, it can also be eliminated with divine magic. However, Murin shook her head and said, even if you use the most brilliant blessing magic, you won't be able to make him not want to fall in love anymore, because this is his spontaneous reaction. Although it is caused by external factors, his soul has already been touched. His feelings belong to him. You can't make him not dream of me. Aman thought for a moment. Then there is only one way. Murin understood what Aman was talking about and reminded him. The imprint of the soul cannot be erased, but the memory can be sealed. However, sealing a piece of memory was something only gods could do. If you use this method on Alexander here, you will violate your agreement with Zeus. Why are you unhappy? In fact, this method can't succeed unconditionally. It also depends on whether the target can arouse his love. Aman smiled apologetically again. This also proves that you are charming enough. Why wouldn't I be happy? But this is a trap that someone has set up for me. It's a trap that they want to use your arrival. As he spoke, Aman imprinted a message into Murin's soul, explaining a series of recent events. Murin also instantly understood that she had fallen into a trap. She frowned and said, "This kind of small thing. This action is nothing more than to leave a shadow in Alexander's heart. Every time he sees you, he can't help but think of this matter, feel regret, and secretly sigh. Although he still respects you and won't say anything he shouldn't say, I'm afraid it's not a happy thing to always think of these things. This is the subtlety of emotions. Repeatedly prying open a small crack, over time, it can create a bigger crack." Aman asked, "It's Aphrodite's method again. Why does she always do the same thing on such boring things?" Murin grabbed Aman's hand. "You have to be careful, this method is not boring at all. Although it's just a small problem, the accumulation of small problems over and over again can magnify the cracks that have not yet been seen. That is the inherent weakness of human nature. As the goddess of love, of course Aphrodite can use such methods, and I suspect that there is someone guiding her behind the scenes. It's a very clever plan. Apollo is no match for you. If they want to fight you directly, they may not be a match for anyone, but they use people related to you, including Madanzo, Alexander, and now I'm involved. As long as the gods exist in the world, they will have weaknesses. If you don't have a relationship with those around you, then why do you exist? So they are starting from here to achieve their goal." Murin was indeed an angel who had transcended eternal life, and was once the goddess of youth and love. Although she was schemed against, when she came back to her senses, she saw through the matter very clearly. The one guiding Aphrodite was the goddess of wisdom, Yelena, and Murin revealed Yelena's plan, and predicted that there would be trouble in the future. Aman nodded and said, "In fact, Xerxes has already warned me of what will happen. This is also the test I have to face when I come here to seek confirmation. It seems to be just some boring trouble, but the means of the gods are often understood after the fact. I also want to thank you for coming here today. Although this is the result of the Olympian gods' plan, you have also reminded me." Murin said again, "Even I have been plotted against. It's embarrassing to stay here, so I'd better leave. Since you understand the other party's intentions, you have to be careful." Aman smiled and said, "You don't have to be so anxious. Since you are here, it's not too late to leave tomorrow. I will accompany you around Macedonia." The next day, Eunamna quietly left Macedonia, and did not stay in the realm of Olympus. The next 2 months were peaceful, as if nothing had happened. Alexander did not mention this to anyone. He knew what he should not say, what he should not overthink. But in the dead of night, he could not help but think of Eunamna and feel helpless and regretful. The young prince inexplicably experienced the feeling of falling in love. Was this all because of Aman? In fact, he knew very well that this had nothing to do with Aman. The wedding of Philip II's daughter and Alexander's sister was finally held. The bride's identity was special, and the wedding was held at the border of the Kingdom of Macedonia. It was originally the territory of the Turkic kingdom, which was occupied by Macedonia after the Hippocratic War. Both Philip II and Alexander attended the wedding. Alexander had already decided to choose a princess who would be the most helpful to the Kingdom of Macedonia in the future. He told his father about this decision, and Philip II was very happy. This child was so sensible. Aman, however, was a little worried and specifically told Madanzo to accompany Alexander. The purpose of this marriage arranged by Philip II was to control and annex Turkic, and there would certainly be people who would not want to see it. Thinking back to the time when Aman assassinated Emperor Sinek, it was also at a wedding. Whether there would be an accident or not, it was better to be prepared. Aman was prepared, but an accident still happened. At dusk on the day of the wedding, a mage rushed back to the capital on a flying spear to report that Philip II had been assassinated. The murderer assassinated the king and escaped with the help of his accomplices. When he fled to the border, he was caught and killed in the battle. Therefore, the motive of the king's assassination was forever a mystery. With the death of Philip II, if there were changes everywhere, the kingdom of Macedonia would immediately face civil strife. Philip II had fought countless battles in his life, but his death was so sudden that no one could have expected it. Fortunately, he had made various arrangements before his death, and Alexander firmly controlled the kingdom's army. Madanzo promptly escorted Alexander back to the capital and let His Highness take charge of the situation and ascend the throne as soon as possible to stabilize the situation. Of course, Aman had to ask Madanzo about this. Since he was there, why did he let the assassin succeed? And Madanzo was also very helpless. He was talking to a group of beautiful princesses with Alexander when the assassin suddenly attacked. No one could guard against this assassin's assassination. He was an 8th-level warrior, and his identity was actually the captain of Philip II bodyguards. After the assassination, people talked about it and made all kinds of speculations, but no one could figure out why the assassin did it. After returning to the capital, Alexander never saw Aman again. The young prince bore the pain of losing his father, and still had to take control of the kingdom in the midst of sudden changes. Zeus had sent down an oracle to bless the new king, and Alexander announced his succession on the same day he returned to Macedonia. He still needed to hold a formal enthronement ceremony, pray to the gods under the auspices of the priests, and accept the congratulations of the ministers and people before he could become the legitimate new king. Therefore, Alexander had a lot of things to deal with recently, and had no time to visit Aristotle. Aristotle was also very busy, living in the palace for many days in a row, taking care of many ceremonial matters for Philip II's funeral and Alexander's ascension to the throne. Aman still lived in Aristotle's residence, as if he had become a forgotten man with nothing to do. After the assassination of Philip II, another rumor appeared all over Macedonia, and it turned out to be about Aman. Back then, Aman had a ferocious nickname, the Emperor's Killer. All the emperors who had met or had close contact with Aman had all met a good end, and almost all of them died a violent death in a very short period of time. Some people mentioned Aman again when discussing the death of Philip II, claiming that the mysterious assassination of Philip II was because of Aman's curse. Many of the people who spread this rumor did not know who Aman was, or even heard of Aman's name, but because of the assassination of Philip II, the story of Aman quickly spread around Macedonia. It was said that such an evil god from a foreign country had quietly entered Macedonia and met Philip II, which led to the tragedy. The people who talked about this had never seen Aman, and most of them did not know that Aman lived in Aristotle's residence. Such a rumor sounded ridiculous, and those who knew it were very clear that the death of Philip II had nothing to do with Aman, and no one mentioned it in front of Aman. But how could Aman not hear it? Aman could only smile bitterly. It turned out that he also had a curse, just like Murin's famous love curse, that made people feel helpless. He did not say anything, but waited quietly, waiting for someone to mention it to him in person. On the day before the enthronement ceremony of the new king, Aristotle, who had been busy for many days, finally returned to his residence. He specially came to see Aman, and it was Madanzo who accompanied him. Madanzo's expression was somewhat awkward and resentful, but Aristotle's expression was very calm, with only a trace of fatigue and regret. Madanzo told Aman what kind of rumors had been spreading in the kingdom of Macedonia recently, and finally gritted his teeth and said, "I don't know who deliberately created this kind of rumor, just to force you to leave Macedonia, so that Alexander would never see you again or hate you. But the person who created the rumor did not succeed, because Alexander did not believe it, and he still invited you to the ceremony." Aman sighed and said, "Madanzo, you don't have to be angry. This can't be completely considered a rumor. People saw the truth that they saw, and what happened in the past was indeed like this. The misfortunes of those emperors had their own reasons for their misfortunes, But people blamed it on me. Aristotle also sighed and said, when my teacher Plato was lecturing on epistemology, he once told a story. There was a group of prisoners who lived in a cave since they were young. Their whole bodies were tied up, and they could not move or turn their heads. They could only look at the back wall of the cave. Behind them there was a bonfire. Between the bonfire and the prisoners, there were people holding up various kinds of dolls, making movements, sometimes talking, sometimes silent. The prisoners could only see the images projected on the wall of the cave, and this was the world that they could see. They would treat these images as reality, and the echoes of the cave as the words of the images. People could only understand what they could see, and it was difficult for their understanding to go beyond what they could see. If a prisoner broke free from the shackles, turned around and walked out of the cave, then he would be able to find the source of the images. Ammon smiled bitterly and said, "Sir, thank you for enlightening me. Is this the source of my so-called killer of emperors curse? Are you also hinting at the meaning of transcending immortality? In fact, I know in my heart that I am like that prisoner who broke free from the shackles." Aristotle explained again. "I know that I don't have to say these words to you. I just told Alexander the story of Plato's teacher to answer the rumor about you in the kingdom. Therefore, Alexander still decided to invite you to the ceremony." Madanzo gave a thumbs up and said, "This child has courage and guts." Ammon waved his hand and said, "You haven't finished yet, continue." Aristotle also smiled bitterly and said, "But the ministers opposed it. Those loyal to Alexander even pulled out their swords and tried to persuade him to never see you again." Aristotle finally said the crux of the problem. Even if Alexander himself did not care about this rumor, others would. The more loyal the minister to the new king, the more they wanted to stop Alexander from seeing Ammon. Those who were willing to serve Alexander even swore to dissuade him. This was their loyalty to Alexander, so it was not convenient for Alexander to reprimand them. Ammon replied, "I understand." In order to show his attitude, Alexander invited me to the ceremony. And for the safety of the new king, the loyal ministers will never allow him to see me. It seems to be a difficult problem. Which is more important, the authority of the king or the loyalty of the people? But this problem is very easy to solve. As long as I refuse the invitation, no one will be put in a difficult position. Aristotle nodded and said, "That's how it is. In fact, there is no need for me to say anything. You will make this decision yourself. But I still have to tell you everything. This is my responsibility." Madanzo said angrily, "I must trace the source of the rumor. Find out who spread it." However, Ammon shook his head and looked up at the sky. He said, "There is no need to trace it. I know who it is. These people did not make up anything. They only told people something that happened, and let people see the shadow on the cave. Mr. Aristotle, it was you who brought me to Macedonia, and I don't want to put you in a difficult position." Chapter 331. Hearing that Ammon was about to leave, Madanzo cried out involuntarily, "If that's the case, aren't you letting someone get away with it? Their goal is to force you to leave." Ammon looked up at the sky and replied, "When people think they have achieved their goals, they often find out in the end that it wasn't as they wished. They don't know why I'm here, but since they've put in so much effort to make me leave, let them think they've succeeded. Please think carefully about why I'm leaving, and what do they get?" In Olympus, Zeus, the father of the gods, questioned the gods in anger, "Who can tell me why Philip II was assassinated?" Hermes, the messenger of the gods, stepped forward and answered, "Since ancient times, many emperors have not had a good ending. Is it strange that Philip II had such an encounter? It would be strange if an emperor who swore to conquer didn't encounter many assassinations in his life. The only difference was whether the assassination was successful or not." Zeus' anger did not diminish. If he was injured or killed on the battlefield, it's not a big deal. But for a captain of the king's bodyguard to assassinate him at a wedding, don't tell me that there wasn't a god behind this. Can any of you explain why he did this? Apollo stepped forward and answered, "My father, please calm down. Philip II was the king of Macedonia, and with the help of Alexander he conquered the other states of the Macedonian peninsula, not in the form of an alliance, but directly annexed states such as Macedonia, and made them worship the Macedonian god. This was his achievement on earth, but the gods lost their independent divine realm. And this action is equivalent to challenging the gods as mortals. The gods can also take revenge on Philip II and his son. Zeus took out his thunder staff and pointed it at Apollo and the other gods. Don't forget your promise not to stop the kingdom of Macedonia from unifying the Hetan Peninsula and taking back your lost interests when fighting back against the Boz Empire. Since everyone has made an agreement, why would anyone do such a thing? Apollo explained, the gods did not violate the agreement, and they are willing to see the kingdom of Macedonia unify the Hetan Peninsula and expand outward. But supporting the kingdom of Macedonia does not mean supporting Philip II. The gods can still punish him for his offense. In fact, we all know the arrangement between you and Ammon. The person you care about is not Philip II, but Alexander. Philip II could not have fulfilled your wishes. Everything he did was to pave the way for Alexander's exploits. The more perfect Philip II preparations were, the more successful Alexander would be. Now, it is time for Alexander to step onto the stage. The sooner he controls Macedonia, the easier it will be for your plan to be realized, so you don't have to blame him for anything. Zeus then looked at Aphrodite and said, in that case, how do you explain the arrow of love that was shot at Alexander? Aphrodite took half a step back and replied, just now, Apollo has said that the gods can take revenge on Philip II and his son, but because of the agreement of the gods, my arrow did not hurt him. It only made him fall in love with someone he shouldn't love. This does not affect your plan. I am only targeting Ammon. The agreement of the Olympian gods does not include Ammon. He is not a god here. At this moment, Zeus heard Ammon's voice. Zeus, please tell the goddess of wisdom, Yelena, that she is ruthless. I will let her have her way and leave the Hetan Peninsula today. When I was here, I did not violate the agreement between us. I never acted as a god in the divine realm of Olympus. I chose a state and helped you complete your plan to unify the divine realm. I will help you complete your plan to unify the divine realm. Now we are still collaborators. I can come back anytime. If one day I return to the divine realm of Olympus, but not in the way I do today, that will mean the end of our cooperation. In the Olympian heaven, there are some gods who want to break with me. Please tell them that my purpose of coming and leaving has nothing to do with them. And I am only completing my own search for proof. If this continues, it will be the dusk of Olympus. You are also responsible for the actions of the gods. After saying this, Ammon's voice disappeared. Zeus was still holding the staff of thunder, and his anger had not subsided. You have succeeded. Ammon has left. I want to ask you, why did you force him to leave, and why did you do so many things? At this time, Hera put her hand on Zeus' shoulder and advised, Lord of Heaven, please put away your weapons and don't be so angry. The gods have made an agreement with you, but it does not mean that they are willing to forgive Ammon. I think this is also for your own good. Zeus slowly put away the staff of thunder and turned his head. So you are the one behind the scenes? No wonder they were so daring. Doing this for my own good? Trying to make Ammon no longer cooperate with me. What reason do you have? Yelena stepped forward and said, my father, in fact, I understand your purpose. You want to seek higher achievements, so you cooperate with Ammon and confirm Marduk's previous attempt. The realm you pursue is to be able to integrate another heaven like Olympus. With the death of Philip II, Alexander personally took control of the kingdom of Macedon. The wheel of history is unstoppable, and the Macedonian army will sweep the continent and conquer Igut. Ammon's divine realm will be integrated into the divine realm of Olympus, and the human world will probably confirm this. If you can't achieve the achievements you vowed by then it means that this attempt is not feasible. And in any case, sooner or later you will clash with Ammon, or sooner or later he will become your enemy. If Ammon remains in Macedon and personally guides Alexander to complete such a feat, then is this his quest or your quest? Then will the divine realm of Ammon sweep the continent, or the divine realm of Olympus? My father, history is only unfolding, and he should withdraw from the stage, so Hera will say that this is for your own good. Zeus narrowed his eyes. But my cooperation with Amon has not ended. He has only left temporarily. Yelena smiled. You don't have to break your agreement with him. I have my own ways to make him withdraw from your cooperation. At this time, Ares quietly asked Hermes, You are the god who travels the world the most. Can you tell me why we kicked Amon out? Hermes replied, If Amon and Zeus continue to cooperate, they will only get what they want, and it will not benefit us. Why did he say that? Philip II's unification of the Hetan Peninsula violated the interests of the gods and led to a war of divine messengers. Later, the gods reached a new agreement to make up for the loss of the Hetan Peninsula by expanding the divine realm of Olympus to the continent. The larger the new divine realm developed by the Olympian gods, the more benefits the gods would reap. But there was a foreign god, Amon, in the middle. Alexander once promised that even if he reached Igut, he would sacrifice to Amon and rebuild the temple of Isis, which was not what the Olympian gods wanted. Zeus's purpose might be to seek a higher realm, and the reason why the gods reached a compromise was to pursue greater benefits in the expansion. But if they let Amon continue to cooperate with Zeus, the biggest beneficiary besides Zeus would probably be Amon. So the gods wanted to destroy this cooperation, and some gods were even unwilling to let Zeus achieve his wish. According to Zeus's best expectations, if he could prove his vow in the future and merge the Olympian kingdom with Amon's kingdom of angels, it would be equivalent to Amon joining the Olympian gods in another way. This definitely wasn't a good thing for the original sovereigns. Amon would become the most important god in the Olympian gods besides Zeus. Apollo and the others would not be a match for him, and the benefits of the divine realm's expansion would probably only be divided between Amon and Zeus. So Yelena and the others repeatedly tried to kick Amon out, and they even got Hera's support behind the scenes. Forcing Amon away was only the first step. If they really wanted to get Amon out, they probably had to have another plan. Zeus listened to Yelena's words and narrowed his eyes, no longer angry. No one knew what the king of Olympus was thinking. In the mortal kingdom of Macedonia, Amon was saying goodbye to Aristotle. This time, he came all the way to the Hetan Peninsula to seek confirmation, and worked with Zeus to come up with the boldest plan in the mortal world. Although he was forced to leave by the Olympian gods, Amon also gained a lot. The most important enlightenment did not come from the gods, but from the two mortals, Aesop and Aristotle. From their words and deeds, Amon had a lot of new insights. Before leaving, Amon said to Medanzo, I want to leave here and return to heaven. You have not transcended eternal life, so you should go back to the Garden of Eden first. Medanzo shook his head and said, No, I want to stay in Macedonia. Amon frowned slightly. You want to stay alone? You no longer have my protection. As an emissary of another god, you will stay alone in the realm of Olympus. You know that the gods are watching you with hostile eyes. If you are not careful, you may be destroyed. Why take such a risk? Medanzo replied, I came here with my own reasons for seeking confirmation. I helped Alexander design the military formation, drill the army, and taught him everything I could. He also promised me that he would help and allow David to establish the kingdom of Vallon in the future, offer sacrifices in your temple, and rebuild the temple of Isis. In this case, I will continue to help him until I witness him fulfill his promise, which is also equivalent to witnessing what I want. My God, please allow me to stay. For the first time, Amon showed a look of approval for this disciple. He smiled and said, Well, I allow you to stay. It is not so easy to reach the end of human cultivation. Since you have made the decision, this is your chance. Even if there is the danger of death, you have to face it. I bless you, Medanzo. I will wait for you in heaven. After Amon finished speaking, he turned and walked out of the courtyard. The people in the courtyard saw him walk out, but the people outside did not see him walk out. The god seemed to disappear into the void, not even leaving a ripple in the air. The next moment, Amon appeared in heaven. Because in the realm of Olympus, Amon could not act as a god and could not use the means of the gods, and it was not his realm, he did not know what was happening. The angels who stayed in heaven, led by Seagull, welcomed the return of Amon. However, Ammonius suddenly frowned, turned around, and disappeared again. As soon as Ammonius returned to heaven, He turned around and went to the human world. Because something unexpected had happened, Murin and Jialai had also rushed back to the Rose Garden. The Rose Garden was originally the divine palace of Murin, the goddess of youth and love in the Anunnaki divine clan. The goddess herself also came here, but it was mainly used as a place for the divine emissaries to live and practice. The divine palace was protected by a magic formation, isolated from the outside world, almost equivalent to another world. Even if ordinary people came here, they would not find any trace of the divine palace. The divine emissaries living in the divine palace naturally knew how to open the door to enter and exit. If it was anyone else, even a god, without permission, they would not be able to enter unless they attacked by force. But the price of forcibly breaking the protective formation and the spatial boundary of the divine palace was also considerable, and it was much easier to defend a divine palace than to break it. Therefore, for the divine emissaries, this was a peaceful world. When the expansion of the Great Light Divine Clan extended the divine realm to the entire continent, the divine realm of the Anunnaki Divine Clan had been lost. But the divine palaces of the gods were still there. Later, when Amon merged the Anunnaki Divine Kingdom and the Ennead Divine Kingdom, the gods became angels, and their divine palaces in the human world also became a paradise for angels. Only those who were guided could enter, and Murin's Rose Garden was one of them. But today something unthinkable had happened. Even the gods were surprised. A Rose JJ, a thief, had entered the garden. If it was the courtyard of an ordinary family, the thief might not go through the front door but climb over the wall. But that was the divine palace on earth, the paradise of angels. There was a spatial magic formation separating it, and it was in a desolate place on the Saya Plateau. How could someone sneak in? Since it was a thief, of course, it was impossible to open the door in the normal way. If a god found this divine palace and wanted to force his way in, he would have to break the protective formation. But such a bizarre thing happened. There was just one person who sneaked into the Rose Garden without the divine emissaries noticing. Not only did he sneak in by himself, but he also brought in a companion. To use the analogy of a courtyard in the human world, the two of them, of course, did not enter through the gate, nor did they climb over the wall, but through the wall. And as soon as they entered, they got into trouble. The first person they met in the Rose Garden was the former saintess of Babylon, Wendy. Wendy was singing among the flowers at that time, and one of them saw Wendy and said to the other, "This girl is quite beautiful. How did she get possessed?" The other person stared with wide eyes and said, "Since we met, let's help her." With that said, he waved his hand and Wendy woke up. Wendy may have been under the most brilliant message magic in the world. It was an illusion that Amon had left in her soul, but for Wendy, it was a very real experience. Amon could not awaken the power of Wendy's origin, and the gods could not let everyone they met achieve great things. In this life, Wendy could only be immortal. So when Amon left the Garden of Eden the last time, he used a magic to make Wendy think that he was still here with her, living a happy life all these years. Wendy was singing to Amon among the flowers when she heard a snap of her fingers, and Amon suddenly disappeared. The Rose Garden was still the Rose Garden, but in front of her were two strange people. She couldn't help but let out a cry of alarm, not because of the appearance of these two people, but because of Amon's sudden disappearance and the inexplicable appearance of the strangers. This cry of alarm alarmed the gods. Murin was in the kingdom of heaven, and she was the first to discover the situation. At that time she was shocked. What thief in the world could sneak into the Rose Garden? It must be the invasion of an unknown demon or a foreign god. Jialai was the second to discover the situation, but her speed was faster than Murin, and she was the first to rush to the Rose Garden from the kingdom of heaven. As a guardian angel, how could Jialai allow such a thing to happen? She appeared directly in front of Wendy and noticed that the intruder had just broken Amon's magic. She waved the blade of order and slashed at it. Behind her, Wendy exclaimed, "Jialai, stop." Why did she stop Jialai's attack? Because the silver arc of the blade of order was slashing at a child, the one who inexplicably penetrated the space barrier of the Rose Garden and broke Ammonius' magic. Jialai was experienced in battle, and had seen many demons and monsters. She was never fooled by the appearance of the enemy. But when Wendy saw the child, she couldn't bear to let Jialai hurt him. It was a little boy, his face was pale and rosy, and he looked like he was at most 5 or 6 years old. His appearance was very special, never seen in the Heaven's Pivot continent. His head was shaved, leaving only a peach shape on the top of his head to his forehead. He wore a small robe that seemed to be woven from silver, with wide sleeves that almost reached the ground, and a golden belt. The child looked so cute that Wendy almost wanted to hug and kiss him when she saw him. However, as soon as Jialai appeared, he slashed with his axe. The little boy broke Amon's magic, and was giggling at another little girl beside him. The little girl was his companion. She looked even smaller and cuter. She looked to be only 4 or 5 years old. She wore a bright red and green jacket. Her tender little face looked like it could be broken by a blow, and her big eyes were incomparably clear. Suddenly, Jialai appeared and slashed with his axe. The blade of order had the power to cut through space, and nothing tangible could stop it. The little boy was shocked and jumped up and shouted, "Oh, so fierce!" He waved his sleeves and turned into a ball of light, covering himself and the little girl. The arc of the blade of order slashed through the void, and the figures of the 2 children were revealed again, their bodies unharmed. Jialai was surprised. What a clever method! Where did he come from? The little boy looked down at his sleeve and curled his mouth as if he was about to cry. Then he looked up and pointed at Jialai. "You woman, you are too fierce. Why did you hurt me without saying a word?" Chapter 332. At this moment, Murin had arrived and happened to appear beside Jialai. Seeing this scene, she was deeply shocked. But she immediately revealed a smile, and stepped forward to smile at the 2 children. "Hold your anger, may I ask where did you come from?" The young boy was stunned when he saw Murin, but he still puffed up his cheeks. "We are not supernatural beings. We came here to pick herbs in the mountains. We came here by mistake and saw someone bewitched by the flowers. But this person suddenly appeared out of nowhere, and used an artifact. What kind of logic is this?" The little girl secretly tugged at his sleeve. "Brother Gomang, something's not right. This is clearly someone else's paradise. That girl has no cultivation or powers, but she seems to have been reborn. Although she was bewitched, it didn't seem to harm her." Murin continued smiling. "This is my rose garden. You barged in without even greeting me and broke my divine spell. It's inevitable that you'll be mistaken for demons. Even if you're a guest, you can't ignore the host and cause trouble the moment you enter. Jialai Gang. I thought you were going to harm Wendy." Murin saw that the 2 children were not easy to deal with. Their origins and intentions were unclear, so she greeted them with a smile. She wanted to calm them down first to avoid any unexpected conflict. The young boy saw that she spoke kindly and smiled beautifully, so he cupped his meaty fists in front of his chest. It looked like he was bowing. "We come from Kunlun. We pick snow chrysanthemums from the cold and high mountains. Just as we stretched out our branches, we saw flowers blooming like brocade. But we didn't see Jinshui beside us. We knew we had entered the paradise, so we pulled Jinshui in and coincidentally saw this girl singing in the flowers. We didn't mean to barge in, but this girl was bewitched for some other reason. I'm afraid it's a misunderstanding. So this is your cave abode. May I ask which immortal you are?" The Jinshui he spoke of should be the little girl's name. That should be the name of that little girl. They claimed to have come from a place called Kunlun. While Murin was confused, she finally understood what he meant. The young boy called the rose garden a paradise. Since Murin was the owner of this place, then this was her immortal cave abode. These 2 children were clearly gods, but they claimed that they were not ghosts or gods, and they also called Murin a celestial being. At this time, Jialai heard Amon's voice in his soul. "Put away your weapons, don't start a fight. These 2 gods have no ill intentions." Murin also heard Amon's voice in her soul. "These 2 children have a special background, and may be very important to me. Try to ask them to stay as guests." As the voice echoed, Amon appeared beside Wendy. Wendy came to her senses when she saw Amon. She grabbed his sleeve and said, "What happened just now? Why did you suddenly disappear?" Those two kids are so cute, please don't hurt them, Amon said softly. There was something urgent just now, so I went to deal with it. Don't worry, those two kids are guests of the rose garden. You Namna will treat them well. The boy named Gomang was alarmed when he saw Amon appear. He reached out to pull Zhenshui back, and took 2 steps back. He wore a wary look as he said, "Another immortal?" Today he had really entered the immortal mountain by mistake. It's our fault for trespassing and breaking the spell, but that axe strike just now was a little too fierce. We have no ill intentions, and if you don't welcome us, then we'll take our leave. Jiao Lai had already put away his axe. He stepped forward and bowed. Two gods, your arrival is too strange. No matter who it is, it's hard to avoid misunderstandings. If we offended you just now, please don't take it to heart. The little girl named Zhenshui pouted and said, "Didn't I tell you that we're not ghosts or gods? Why do you always call me that?" Morin had already walked over with a smile. "This is just a form of respect, just like how you called me an immortal just now. It's rare for the Rose Garden to have guests, and today is a rare occasion. Since it was just a misunderstanding, there's no need to fuss over it. I have strange flowers and herbs that never wilt in the 4 seasons here. There's also good wine and delicacies. If you like it, you can have fun here. Big sister is very happy to entertain 2 guests from afar." Zhenshui frowned again. She looked at Morin and said, "How old are you for me to call you big sister?" These words were really funny. After transcending eternal life, one would not remember the passage of time in the mortal world. And a god's appearance was a reflection of their state of mind. Therefore, gods did not care about their age. Zhenshui could not just call Morin big sister, she could even call her auntie. However, she still wrinkled her nose and spoke very seriously. Morin could only smile and reply, "Then you can call me Yunam Na." At this moment, Wendy also stepped forward and stretched out her arms, saying pleasantly, "I'm Wendy and I live here. Little brother, little sister, welcome to the Rose Garden to play." Gomang frowned and seemed a little unwilling, but he did not dodge. His arm, along with his magical feather sleeve, was actually grabbed by the mortal Wendy. Wendy also grabbed Zhenshui's hand and pulled the 2 children over. Gomang asked Zhenshui softly, "Are we going to play here?" Zhenshui replied, "Since we're here, let's take a look. This place is very beautiful. Didn't we come to look for strange flowers and herbs? Perhaps there are some that we haven't found yet." Amon did not entertain guests in the distant palace at the foot of the mountain. He beckoned to the grassy slope beside the flowering shrubs, and a beautiful tent appeared. There were already tables, chairs, and fine wine set up in the tent. Ever since he avoided the Lion King in the desert, Amon had always had this habit of entertaining guests, mainly to entertain great achievers of special status. The 2 children were not surprised by Amon's fear. They walked into the tent and sat down, looking like 2 adults, cute and playful. Morin almost couldn't resist reaching out to pat Gomang's head, but she did not do so. She knew very well that this child was not simple, and his achievements were not inferior to hers. The elf maid Shebra was still in the Garden of Eden, but there were other oracles in the Rose Garden. Everyone rushed over upon hearing the news. However, Amon waved the oracles away and personally poured wine for Gomang. When it was in front of Zhenshui, the little girl shook her head and said, "I don't want to drink anymore." She had 2 slanted pigtails, and when she shook her head, the pigtails swayed in an interesting manner. Wendy poured a light rose-colored, transparent drink into Zhenshui's cup. Zhenshui sniffed and said, "Is this made with the honey of thorny rose flower?" Wendy replied, "It's honey from a type of wild flower at the foot of the mountain. I didn't know it was called thorny rose flower. Did I make it myself? Is it good?" Zhenshui took a small sip and felt the sweet fragrance permeate her body. She couldn't help but nod in praise. This honey can heal internal injuries and assist in the recovery of the cauldron. It also has the effect of relaxing the circulation of spiritual energy. It's really good stuff. Also, it's pure and untainted. If you made it yourself, Big Sister is a good person. She actually called Wendy Big Sister and said she was a good person. Morin couldn't help but cover her mouth and laugh. If Wendy is a good person, then we're not? Of course she was joking, but Gomang answered seriously. Other than her, none of you are human. The entire table laughed. Other than Wendy, none of them were considered human. Amon, Jialai, and Murin had transcended eternal life, and were a different kind of existence. As for Gomang and Zhenshui, there was no need to mention them. After Gomang said that, he raised his cup and drank. The way the child drank gave Amon a fright. Amon naturally took out the best wine in the heaven's pivot continent. However, the child's posture made it seem like he was pouring it into his mouth instead of tasting it. With a gulp, he emptied the cup. Amon asked, "Mr. Gomang, how is this wine?" Gomang frowned slightly and said in a pompous manner, "It should be good, but it's not my usual taste." Jialai and Murin's expressions changed slightly. This child sure had a big mouth. Zhenshui handed his cup over. "Brother Gomang, if you don't like wine, try this. It's delicious." Gomang didn't take the cup. Amon sensed that he had scanned it with something akin to a detection spell before answering. Although the nectar of auspicious grass thorny rose is not bad, it's best if you want to use it as a cultivation vessel and aid in the circulation of divine energy. Dan's so-called auspicious rose honey isn't honey, but the essence of dew. Wendy, since you can use this to entertain your guests, we can't just drink it for free. I'll give you the auspicious rose honey later, and you can harvest it as well. Murin hurriedly said, "The oracles here love the nectar that Wendy harvests. It's indeed beneficial for cultivation. I've been growing these flowers in the rose garden for a long time. Absorbing the essence of the flower's aura is very beneficial. This is a God segment, but I've never thought of using another segment to condense it into an object." Gomang answered, "Immortal Duan Shan fakes external objects, but that doesn't necessarily mean the pill will be formed. However, the completed pill can be taken and given to others. You should have thought of this long ago." The more Amon listened, the more curious he became. The two gods in front of him were like an unknown world to him. He poured another cup of wine for Gomang and said, "It's good that you don't mind Jialai's conflict with you. Seeing that your Duan Gaochao is here, I have to thank you for not retaliating. Otherwise, you might have hurt her." Unexpectedly, Gomang put down his cup and said, "I wouldn't have hurt her. I'm just a body formed from a strand of my thoughts. Although I have great divine powers, I don't have great dermic powers. Her strike wasn't able to hurt me. It's just that the divine artifact had sliced through my sleeve, but I couldn't do anything to her." Truewater held up his cup and said, "You were indeed mistaken. Brother Gomang wouldn't have hurt Wendy. He never harms any living beings in the world. It was just that when he saw Wendy's appearance, he mistakenly thought." Amon coughed in time to cut off Truewater's words. His cough also imprinted information from the divine spell into his soul, explaining Wendy's identity and the reason he had used the divine spell. The two children immediately reacted. Gomang grinned at Amon. "So you were the one who did it. You weren't harming anyone. I thought I was helping someone, but my good intentions nearly spoiled a good thing." Amon had already carefully measured the two children's auras. They were naturally not mortals, but he couldn't tell what kind of existence they were. In terms of the realm of the gods, these two children weren't higher than him, but they were precisely in the realm that he didn't understand. Amon was able to keep his composure, and wasn't in a hurry to get to the bottom of the matter. Instead, he changed the topic. "There's no need to point out what happened just now. In any case, I thank you for your good intentions. I should call you immortals. That should be what you call yourselves. I've never seen immortals like you on the continent. May I ask if you're from the world of Mahasvara?" Truewater frowned and shook his pigtails. No, how could we be from that place? Do you think we look like Mahasvara?" Gomang also put down his cup and asked in return, "You know Buoxuan?" Amon was slightly taken aback. Marduk's other name was Buoxuan. This was still a secret on the continent. He didn't expect the child to directly call out Buoxuan's name. He replied with a wry smile, "Not only do I know him, I've had many dealings with him." Gomang added, "He's a very interesting person with great powers of bewitchment. Be careful when dealing with him." Amon nodded in agreement. "Thank you for the reminder. I've been very careful. May I ask if you're from the Buddhist kingdom of Amateus? In addition to Buoxuan's Mahasvara, The other guidance Amon knew was from Amateus. As for the Buddhist kingdom of Amateus, he had heard Xitigarbha and Vincent mention it before. This time it was Gomang's turn to be slightly surprised. "You've seen Amateus?" Amon replied. "I've met him once." As he spoke, he used message magic to imprint the scene of him seeing Amateus into Gomang's and Truewater's souls. Truewater opened her small mouth and said in an envious tone, "So you've seen the manifestation of Amateus in the world. What a blessing! We haven't seen him, and he's not a disciple of the Buddhist kingdom of Amateus. Amateus has reached the unseen realm, and his achievements are above the golden immortal realm." Amon frowned. "May I ask about your origins?" Truewater replied with a smile. "We're Gomang and Truewater. Wasn't that obvious?" How could Amon know Gomang and Truewater? Truewater's words naturally had a magical effect similar to message magic. However, it wasn't like message magic that directly imprinted into the soul. Instead, it explained their origins to those who could hear it. In fact, the two children had been speaking with this strange divine power. Otherwise, as a mortal, Wendy wouldn't have been able to understand what they were talking about. This was because they were speaking in a language other than that of the Heaven's pivot continent. Yet, they could converse freely with Amon and company. They came from the distant east, a place called Kunlun. However, what Amon saw wasn't the two gods themselves. Instead, it was the manifestation of the two gods in meditation. Amon didn't know the names of the two gods, but the children in front of him had their own names. They were Gomang and Truewater. In fact, in terms of achievements, Amon should be above the two gods, but the ingenuity of the realm was different. Gomang and Truewater were like gods, but not gods. They had great divine power, but no great magic power. No wonder Amon couldn't see what kind of existence they were. Amon couldn't help but think of the divine power and God's eye that Vincent Boss had discussed with him. Vincent Boss was from the Heaven's pivot continent, and clearly knew the gods here. However, the two children didn't know that they had come here by chance. Tracing the veins of the mountains to collect the seeds of strange flowers and plants, they accidentally went too far, and ended up on the Saya Plateau. Amon couldn't help but ask, "Then may I ask who am I talking to?" Truewater smiled and pointed at Wendy. Who was she singing to in the flowers just now? Amon smiled and didn't continue to dwell on the question. He asked, "Just now you Namna called you gods, but you were very unhappy and claimed that you weren't a god. What's going on?" He naturally raised the question he was most concerned about in the conversation. His soul vaguely felt that this question was very important, as if it was the key to unlocking the proof of his search. He was very eager for the two children to explain. Unexpectedly, Gomang put down his cup and spread his arms. "Judging from your realm, you should be above me as a golden immortal." He mentioned another word. The voice of a golden immortal was naturally accompanied by an explanation. Those who could understand it could accept it, but those who couldn't understand it couldn't hear it. This was the achievement of the God of Gods that Artemis mentioned. She could use her soul imprint and cultivation to see that she could create a world in the undying eternity, and receive disciples who had transcended eternal life. She could also share it with the angels or the gods, causing it to grow and become more colorful. Furthermore, the gods' body and soul aren't bound by this world. They can freely come and go as they please. However, Gomang's oath of a golden immortal was different from Amon's. The concept of a golden immortal was very different from the so-called master of a celestial system, or kingdom of heaven in the Heaven's pivot continent. It was only in terms of realm, so he was referring to a golden immortal. Truewater said, "Brother Gomang, there's no harm in discussing it with him. Buddhism has the boy of good fortune, 53 ginseng. Although he isn't on the same path and his achievements are higher than yours, he can still ask you questions." Morin was very clever. Although she didn't fully understand what they were talking about, she roughly understood Amon's intentions. These questions couldn't be answered in a few words. She had to be willing to answer. She immediately stood up. "There's no hurry. Since we're guests, let's start the feast first. There's wine and honey here. Let's try the delicacies that Amon and I made." Gomang waved his sleeves. "That's right. Let's eat first." Murin and Amon exchanged looks and smiled. They began making delicacies on the table. Aman made roasted meat and thick soup. Murin took out a stone pancake. This was a common dish in the Heaven's Pivot continent, but in their hands, it was an unparalleled delicacy. Even emperors rarely enjoyed it. Schwedingen had loved Aman's cooking. The tempting aroma wafted in the air, making people salivate uncontrollably. In such a beautiful place, watching the gods concoct rare delicacies in the human world with their own eyes was already a great enjoyment in life, even if they hadn't tasted it yet. Gomang whispered, "It looks good." Truewater wrinkled her nose. "They don't look like barbarians. Why are they doing it in front of us? Although immortals aren't particular about it, this isn't how humans treat their guests." Gomang shook his head slightly. "Doing it in front of us and eating without chopsticks is indeed not how we treat our guests. Although they have attained the Tao, they are still people outside of society. Eating is like cooking on the streets. But you don't have to be too calculative when he's diligent and attentive." Chapter 333. What did the two children mean? Zhen Shui was puzzled. Why did Aman and Murin bring the food that should have been prepared in the kitchen to the dining table? If they were really entertaining guests, they should have soaked the meat with seasonings, cooked it, and cut it into pieces before serving it on a plate. They shouldn't have roasted it by the side of the table with oil and smoke wafting everywhere. It would have been fine if they were having a picnic, but it was odd for them to have a formal banquet in a cave abode on their first meeting. Aman and Murin had personally prepared delicacies for their guests, making Zhen Shui curious. Yet, Gomang had persuaded Zhen Shui not to fuss over it. It left him at a loss whether to laugh or cry. As for Aman, he actually heard their conversation while he was focused. Therefore, he didn't serve a large piece of roasted meat, but instead sliced the meat into small pieces and placed them on a plate. The two children didn't use knives or extend their hands. Instead, they pointed at the flower branches beside them. 4 thin twigs that were less than a foot long flew over. The twigs peeled off and turned into 2 pairs of thin sticks. They cleverly used the sticks between their fingers to pick up food. From time to time, they would reach out to scoop soup with a spoon. It looked magical and elegant, leaving Wendy dumbfounded. Deities didn't need to eat, but that didn't mean they couldn't. They could still enjoy the delicacies of the mortal world. After eating for a while, Gomang put down the 2 sticks in his hands before Aman could ask a question. "Thank you for your hospitality. You had something to ask me. Why do you claim to not be a supernatural being? But do you have to explain why you call me a deity? What do you mean by a deity?" Aman wanted to ask about cultivation, but he had to first explain his situation to Gomang. Only then would Gomang know what he wanted to ask. What was a deity? This question wasn't easy to answer. The traditional deities of the Heaven's Pivot continent were those who had transcended eternal life. However, Aman was worshipped as the only god. He had received his guidance, transcended eternal life, and called himself an angel. It wasn't easy to explain these matters clearly. Aman used the simplest and most direct method. He held a cup of wine and looked at Gomang and Zhen Shui, saying, "In my kingdom, I'm the only god." This sentence contained a piece of information. It was not forcefully imprinted into the soul, but was accompanied by the voice of an immortal. The so-called immortal's witty words was the mysterious method that the two children had used when they were talking just now. Aman's achievements were higher than theirs, and he could use it with a single thought. Great Wishksidigarba had used a similar method to communicate with him, but at that time, Aman had not comprehended it thoroughly, and this information was unimaginably complex. Apart from some confidential details that should not or were inconvenient to say, Aman told her everything about his life, from the time he grew up in Duk to the moment he sat in the rose garden. The stories of all kinds of people and gods he had met were all told to him. However, Aman only showed a simple display so that the two children could understand what he had seen and heard. Even so, ordinary deities would not be able to handle such a huge amount of information in a short period of time. If the soul was not unimaginably powerful, Aman's direct imprinting of this information would cause a kind of harm. So Aman used the other party's witty words as a reference. How much the other party could understand, and accept depended on themselves. He was also testing how powerful the souls of the two children were, and how long it would take for them to react. Gomang held the cup, his hand stopped in midair as if frozen. After a long time he put the cup down. Amon was slightly taken aback. Although the little boy's realm was not as high as his, the strength of his soul was beyond his imagination. It was no less than any angel in the kingdom. Looking at True Water again, Amon was even more surprised. Only when Gomang put down the cup did Amon notice her. It turned out that the little girl had been blinking her eyes at some point in time, as if she was recalling something. "You are very open." Amon smiled. "I have nothing to hide." Gomang: "Thank you." Amon: "You're welcome, it's because I would like to consult you." Amon's frankness in sharing his experiences gave Gomang a lot to learn from him. The reason why Amon had brought Metatra with him on a tour of the Khitan Peninsula was to use this method to allow his disciples to seek enlightenment. Although Gomang and Truewater didn't participate in it personally, they could learn a lot from a bystander's perspective. Having received such a heavy gift from Amon, Gomang couldn't not return the favor. He put down the cup and said, "I don't know what you want to ask me, but feel free to ask. I'll tell you everything I know." However, this sentence contained a hint of information. Amon could only ask questions related to his own experiences, and not about Gomang and Truewater. Amon's first question was a little odd because he wasn't asking himself. Instead, he asked thoughtfully, "May I know what Zeus seeks?" Gomang answered, "The pinnacle of the quasi-golden immortal realm." What was the pinnacle of the golden immortal realm? Gomang gave a detailed explanation. With the ability to open up one's beer, one could form an immortal abode in a boundless and profound world. Those who attained great freedom were known as golden immortals. As for the pinnacle of the golden immortal realm, not only did it form a world of its own, it could also allow a golden immortal world to attach itself to it. The beer could see the essence of knowledge and the seal of immortality. Beyond the immortal abode, there would be a Tao venue, making it an immortal world. Due to the different paths he sought, what Zeus sought might not be what Gomang referred to as an immortal world. However, the realm he sought was similar to the pinnacle of golden immortals. To be able to use the Olympus heavenly kingdom to contain another heavenly kingdom, fusing his soul imprint with his cultivation insights, allowing the Olympus heavenly kingdom to expand in depth and extension, Zeus was the true god of gods. Amon could not help but nod. So that's the so-called god of gods. And what realm am I seeking? Gomang's answer was very straightforward, leaving Amon somewhat disappointed. It's not something I know, so I'm not allowed to enjoy it. Back in Amat's great prophecy, the heavens' pivot continent would give birth to a god of gods. And Artemis believed that Zeus or Amon had already attained the status of a god of gods, fulfilling the prophecy. However, after hearing Gomang's explanation, Amon realized that he and Zeus had yet to truly seek confirmation. Only by reaching the pinnacle of quasi-golden immortals that Gomang mentioned, could one be called a god of gods. As for Amon's vow, that wasn't the case. Or rather, it wasn't just that. He wanted to transcend this realm. However, transcending this realm also required him to experience this realm. Among the angels he guided, if one reached his current accomplishments, they would be able to establish a heavenly kingdom in undying eternity, becoming what Gomang referred to as a quasi-golden immortal. If that day came and Amon was still the one god, he would be able to fuse his heavenly kingdom with his disciples' worlds. That would be equivalent to seeking confirmation of the god of gods. As for higher realms, Gomang had heard of them, but he was unable to explain them to Amon. At that moment he took the initiative to introduce his own accomplishments. In the distant east, Gomang was a manifestation of a certain immortal's thoughts. He had great divine powers and insight, but that immortal had yet to attain golden immortal status. Therefore, Gomang's realm was at the true immortal materialization realm. It could be understood as the pinnacle of the creator's achievements, as well as being able to materialize unique mountains and rivers out of the void. When immortals reach the true immortal materialization realm, they would have the same means as the creator, allowing them to create a world in undying eternity. However, that wasn't what they sought. Their views were also very interesting. Such a world existed in the soul, and it could exist as one wished or not. There was no need to really create one and leave it there. It was just a means of verification. It was just like how people could make a strange painting, and then enter the mountains and rivers in the painting to travel. However, a painting was just a painting and not the real mountains and rivers. What the painter sought confirmation was the technique of the brush, not the content of the painting itself. This was the confirmation of the immortals. If not, then it would be another path of seeking confirmation. And it could not be called the immortals. It could be Mahayana, or the Buddhists, or the creators of the various divine clans of the original continent, or the archangels that Amon was now guiding. Similar realms, different desires. This wasn't just a difference in views or ideas, but also a difference in cultivation. Since Gomang had taken the initiative to introduce the immortal realms, Amon took the opportunity to ask, the true immortal materialization realm is the pinnacle of the creator. Beyond that is seeking confirmation as a golden immortal. As for the various ancient god systems of the heavens pivot continent, above the creators are the gods of creation. What do you think of the gods of creation's achievements? Gomang shook his head and said, the archangels in your kingdom will no longer seek confirmation as the gods of creation. Under your guidance, they will directly seek confirmation of your current realm as a golden immortal. As for what the gods of creation are, I'm not sure. Immortals who have the beer transformation technique, but are trapped in their own web and seek freedom are not even thinking about it. But according to what you said, the creation of a god system is the end of human desires. If this is what one seeks, it can be considered a suitable goal. However, this is really the end. If there is anything else, there is no way to go unless you vow to cultivate from the beginning again. Gomang didn't know about the gods of creation's achievements in the past, but after hearing Amon's introduction, he understood. He clearly told Amon that this was a dead end. It was fine if this was the goal of the gods, but if there was anything else, there was no way out. As an immortal, he wouldn't have such thoughts, so he didn't know. Amon nodded wistfully. Mr. Gomang, you're right. Back then, Anu and Allah encountered such an encounter, and ultimately chose to vow to cultivate from the beginning again. They only understood after various attempts, but you actually pointed it out with a single sentence. Gomang smiled. It's not that I'm better, but that our paths are different. Although I haven't proven my path, I know what it is. Gomang's situation was different from Amon's. Although his realm was only equivalent to the peak of the creators, he knew what higher pursuits were. Although he hadn't done it yet, he knew what he had to do. Amon had always been exploring on his own. He was a pioneer and had no existing path to refer to. It was the same for Anu and Allah back then. Perhaps it wasn't that they didn't want to seek confirmation as the Lord of Heaven, but they didn't know how. They naturally reached the end of human desires, and created a god system to become the gods of creation. With the ancient gods of creation as a reference, there were other gods who swore their vows. Isis failed, but Zeus and Amon succeeded. Following that, Amon finally asked a crucial question. Mr. Gomang, what do you think of the domain of the source of divine power? Gomang answered plainly, the way of the ghostly cultivators. It was as if the soul had found a glimmer of light in the darkness. Not only did it explain why Gomang and Zhen Shui didn't claim to be of the supernatural, but it also explained the fundamental difference in ideology between the gods of the heavens pivot continent and the immortals that Gomang called immortals. It also solved a knot that had been troubling Amon. This time, it was Amon's turn to be stunned. He sat there with a cup of wine in his hand for a long time. He didn't regain his senses for a long time. Gomang's words seemed to come from another world. From his point of view, regardless of whether one achieved transcendence and eternal life, be it before or after becoming a god, the so-called domain of the source of divine power was simply dispensable. And the immortal who had transformed a wisp of his thoughts into Gomang had never had a domain of the source of divine power. Instead, he used the mortal world as his Tao arena. Gomang didn't deny the usefulness of the domain of the source of divine power for gods. As for the various benefits, Amon was well aware of them. Now that he was the prime god of Igut, there was naturally no need to elaborate. Interestingly, Gomang was also well aware of it. Furthermore, He had seen many living beings cultivate in such a manner. However, an immortal like him had never deliberately pursued such a path. Among the cultivators Gomang had seen, there were spirits, demons, and spirits. They flaunted their divine powers or claimed miracles, to guide or bewitch believers in the mortal world to build temples and build societies to offer sacrifices. There were also great achievements and meritorious deeds in the mortal world. The people were grateful for their kindness and built temples and built societies to offer sacrifices. There were many shaman-gu gods among the people, and it was difficult to distinguish them. By receiving the incense offerings of the mortal world and borrowing the power of the people's wishes to cultivate, it allowed the spirit to take form and the spirits to obtain dharmic powers. This was also the so-called power to repair the soul of the gods. There were also immortals who established their Tao arenas in the mortal world, similar to the temples of the heaven's pivot continent. It might have the effects of a temple, but it wasn't used for the purpose of a temple. The primary purpose of establishing a Tao arena was to pass down the teachings of the Dharma and guide those who were fated. The secondary purpose was to look down on the world and gain knowledge. This was equivalent to what gods meant by absorbing the souls of the mortal world to gain knowledge. As for those who specialized in ghosts and gods, it was a heterodox path. Heterodox paths were not the true path. They could be used, but they couldn't be proven. Upon hearing this, Amon completely understood something. The so-called domain of the source of divine power could be enjoyed after attaining the 9th level of the power of origins. It allowed one to absorb the power to repair the soul, listen to prayers, and investigate everything in the divine domain. However, the achievements of gods didn't originate from this. At times, it was just a symbol of status and benefits. For example, Horus was once the prime god of the Ennead divine domain, making him very powerful. He was nearly omniscient in the divine domain. This might be a form of help to verify higher achievements, but it in itself didn't represent the achievements and realms of a god. When Seth chased Horus off his position as prime god, Horus didn't really make any progress during his long years as prime god. He was still the same god. Did Amon becoming the prime god of Igut help his cultivation? Of course. When his body and soul were injured, he could recover faster, and he could learn more about the mortal world at any time. However, was it because he became a prime god that he sought the realm of the Lord of Heaven? No, of course not. In terms of means, the ghostly cultivation method that Gomang mentioned was no different from the nature of the divine domain that these gods enjoyed. Generally speaking, there was no need to achieve the 9th level in order to be called a god. Any demon or spirit with a bit of skill could borrow it, as long as it could make people set up temples and offer sacrifices. It was just that such a god did not have endless vitality. Therefore, when Murin called Gomang a god, in this immortal's concept, he was actually categorizing him as a demon or spirit. Of course, he would shake his head and deny it. What was a god? According to Gomang's understanding, those who used it were gods. The so-called divine domain was equivalent to the cup of nectar that Wendy poured for true water in his eyes. Gomang believed that the gods in the temples of the heaven's pivot continent could be called the god of virtuous virtue. To mortals, it was a symbol of unfathomable. The guidance that Gomang received was the way of the Supreme. The Supreme said, "When the way descends upon the world, its ghosts are not gods, and its gods do not harm people." In other words, the guidance that mortals received was just a belief, and it had nothing to do with the statue on the altar. What kind of god a god would become depended on what he was doing, and what he was pursuing. The divine domain was both the goal and the result. The power of the origin didn't include the ghostly cultivation method, but the gods of Olympus were fighting for the divine domain, and attempting to expand it. Although their achievements were already very high, they still relied on the ghostly cultivation method. Hearing this, Amon couldn't help but re-examine his own experience. He had also built a divine domain, such as Tsanglung, and today's Igut. It wasn't that he had to do so, but that was what the gods did, so he naturally did so, and there were indeed many gains and benefits. But now that he thought about it, the main reason for each breakthrough in the realm was not this. Perhaps Marduk also understood this. He transformed into Darius and established the Pot's Empire, pushing the Great Light Realm to the entire heavens pivot continent. The main purpose was to verify the Mahasvara he created. After the verification, Marduk left, as if he no longer cared about the Pot's empire. And no one knew that the Great Light God was Marduk or Bushuan. And Zeus seemed to be vaguely thinking about this problem. He wanted to unify the divine domain of Olympus and expand it to the extreme. This was also the pursuit of the ultimate achievement. As for how his reputation in the world was, Zeus didn't seem to care. Now that Ammon understood, what should he do? There was no need to give up the divine domain, just as there was no need for a person to throw away all his family's money in order to prove that he was not greedy, and there was no need to prove this to anyone. He could still have his divine domain, but he could look at it from another perspective. He didn't want to become such a god. No matter how powerful he was, he had to wait for an opportunity, and to realize his vow would inevitably have to pay a great price. Chapter 334. Gomang picked up the 2 thin wooden sticks on the table, and picked up a piece of meat. He said slowly, "Of course. I'm now cultivating the Tao imparted by the Grand Supreme. Above the pinnacle of golden immortals is the realm of 3 begets all things, and the Grand Supreme Oblivion. For example, your and my achievements can be considered, but the Grand Supreme Oblivion is already indescribable." Murin, who had been silent all this while, interrupted in amazement. "No achievements to speak of? Then what was the Grand Supreme like that you saw?" Gomang answered, "The Grand Supreme can't be seen, so I don't know if I've seen him. If you can really meet someone at the Zenith Heaven realm, you might not know who he is, or he doesn't know who you are, or he doesn't know who you are, or he doesn't know who you are, or you don't know who you are." Murin blinked. "Doesn't that mean I can't see him?" True Water interjected softly. "It doesn't mean I can't see him, but everything is possible." Ammon had the fortune to see immeasurable light. Back then, immeasurable light wanted to guide him, but Ammon didn't leave. Lion King ran off with Manjushri. Ammon recalled the scene and said in enlightenment, "I was fortunate enough to see immeasurable light. His realm was already above the pinnacle of golden immortals." Then Manjushri, who took away Lion King, "Is his achievement also what you call a quasi-golden immortal?" One Gomang nodded. Bodhisattva Manjushri can also be said to be a quasi-golden immortal, but his vows are different. "Actually, you are extremely blessed, something I've never seen in my life. You brushed shoulders with immeasurable light, but you were still able to create a heavenly kingdom. Back then, immeasurable light might have come to the west to seek the vows of Ksitigarbha. Meeting you was wonderful, and Ksitigarbha later sought the vows of Bodhisattva in front of you. You asked what realm it was to surpass the gods. Instead of asking me, why don't you ask True Water? She has already sought the vows of a golden immortal, while I'm still at the true immortal materialization realm." One Ammon was shocked once again. The person who had penetrated the Garden of Eden's spatial enchantment was Gomang. The person who had broken his spell was Gomang. The person who had withstood Gabriel's blade of order was Gomang. And the person who had been sitting at the banquet and speaking with confidence was Gomang. Therefore his attention had always been on the little boy. Only now did he know that the little girl, Shun Shui, had achieved even more and had already become a golden immortal. In terms of realm, she was not below him or Zeus. This was a surprise. Shun Shui was holding the cup with both hands, drinking the nectar with relish. Seeing Ammon looking at her, she raised her head and said innocently, "Those like Taishang and immeasurable light have attained the state of grand luo and grand enlightenment." It's hard to explain, and it's useless to talk about it. As long as you are sitting here talking to us, you cannot prove it. As long as you are giving your word on earth, you cannot prove it. Don't ask me how to verify it. I don't know. Even if I knew, I wouldn't be able to say it. But I can tell you that it has nothing to do with cultivation. It requires a great aspiration. Whether such a great aspiration can be realized does not depend on how advanced your cultivation is, or how profound your dharmic powers are. Such a great opportunity probably requires the tribulations of the mortal world and the heavens. It's not something an immortal can decide for himself. One Ammon seemed to understand, but he seemed to be even more confused. With a wry smile, he asked a question that he could clearly ask. Just now Mr. Gomang mentioned that Bodhisattva is also a golden immortal. May I ask if Bodhisattva can create a heavenly kingdom out of nothing like me? Wan Jinshui blinked her big eyes and answered. The golden immortal realm is not about creating something out of nothing, but turning nothing into something. The Bodhisattva realm is not about creating something out of nothing either. According to them, it should be about creating something out of nothing. Nothing is not nothing, and emptiness is not nothing. Your heavenly kingdom is formed in your soul as you cultivate. It can only be revealed when you experience the heavenly tribulation of manifestation. Isn't it? One Gomang pointed at Amon and said to Zhen Shui, Amon's heavenly tribulation of manifestation is really dangerous. He fused the Anunnaki and the Ennead, and if there was the slightest mistake, he would have fallen immediately. Yet he didn't realize it and just passed through. This is also the credit of Anu and Allah. If it weren't for the two gods of creation's vow to help Amon, he wouldn't have succeeded. What a great blessing! Amon understood what Gomang meant. The heavenly tribulation of manifestation that he mentioned was the test to verify the identity of the Lord of the heavenly kingdom. Isis had fallen in such a test. Amon didn't have any lingering fear. He just smiled and said, This is the situation of the founder. I didn't know it at the time, and I will only understand it later. Now I'm thinking about something else. If I want to finally fulfill my vow, will I fall in a greater test? One Morin grabbed his hand and said, What nonsense are you talking about? But Gomang said indifferently, Falling in itself is one of the results of seeking confirmation. What you seek is what you wish for. You should understand this before you become a god. If you hesitate after becoming a god, then you can't have a true great ambition. If you don't, then so be it. You're not bad as you are now. Amon smiled again. He filled Gomang's cup and drank a cup of wine himself. As if talking to himself, he said, I won't do that before none of my disciples has achieved the achievement of the Lord of the heavenly kingdom, because I promised the heavenly kingdom to the angels like Allah or Anu. If my vow can become a true great ambition, just as Zhen Shui said, it doesn't depend entirely on me. But if one day I fulfill my vow, I wonder what will happen? One Zhen Shui said, Supreme oblivion is not heartless. Transcending a ghostly cultivator doesn't mean that you are no longer a ghostly cultivator. You may become the greatest ghostly cultivator among the immortals of the heavens. Even if you have transcended, the foundation of a god like you is still the same. I can't say for sure. Brother Gomang, you are good at divination. If it's as Amon says, what will happen if he can fulfill the great ambition? One Gomang shook his head and said, This matter can't be divined. It's better to observe the world and speak frankly. Amon, your statue will crumble and be trampled by your believers. Those who claim to believe in you will become enemies with each other, calling each other heretical. This doesn't depend on you at the time, but on the soil of the world that gave birth to you. The path you point out leads to the heavenly kingdom, but it's a cup of water in everything. From the perspective of human nature, the struggles of the world are the same. I have nothing more to say. These two children were really direct with their words. They didn't give him any face at all. Amon said with a wry smile, Those who believe in me may not enter the heavenly kingdom, but those who follow me will enter the heavenly kingdom. After saying this, Amon fell silent for a moment. Gomang and Zhen Shui had answered all the questions they could, and those they couldn't. Amon was thinking about the inevitable conflict with the Olympian divine clan in the future, and he suddenly felt enlightened. Amon didn't say anything, but Morin took the opportunity to ask, Since Amon's vow can't be proven, what I seek should be proven, right? Zhen Shui asked with a smile. What do you want to prove? Morin. An angel like me has no wish to live in the eternal kingdom, but in my early years as the Anunnaki's goddess of youth and love, I always wanted to have my own creator's world. Later, I became an angel, and I still want to become an archangel, which is similar to but different from the realm of the creator. In your opinion, how can I fulfill my wish? Gabriel suddenly interrupted and reminded. Morin, you should ask Amon such a question. Morin smiled. Yes, my God has already given me guidance, and I just want to ask these two distant friends what they think of this. Didn't Amon also ask his question? And why are you looking at me like that? Is it strange? One Gomang and Zhen Shui put down their cups and looked at Murin with a puzzled look. Zhen Shui nudged Gomang and said, Brother Gomang, you are far better at discussing the Tao than I am, just tell her. Gomang shrugged. What's there to tell? I'm not the creator. Nor am I an archangel. If we're talking about immortality, she's already at the realm of immortality. Fortune and cultivation are both sufficient, and it's just a thought away. She's the one who didn't react in time. Does she need to ask for the well-being of others when she's drinking water? One Morin was confused. She was sure that Zhen Shui was easier to talk to than Gomang, so she said, Immortal Zhen Shui, what are you talking about? From what you're saying, are you saying that I can become an archangel with a thought? 1. Zhen Shui blinked and returned with a question. Your attainment is already at the realm of immortality. Do you still need to ask me? One Gomang couldn't stand it any further. He pointed at Wendy and asked, Sister, how old are you this year? One Wendy was very obedient and docile. Knowing that she couldn't interrupt, she sat by the side and listened. She didn't expect there to be anything else. Gomang's question left her stunned. Wendy thought for a long time before answering. I forgot. She had indeed forgotten that Wendy had been living carefreely in the rose garden for the past few decades. She didn't know how much time had passed, nor did she know how long it had been. She wasn't a god that transcended eternal life, but her youthfulness didn't fade. How did such a miraculous thing happen? The most crucial reason wasn't Amon's divine arts. Gomang looked at Murin and said, You sought proof of your powers in the temple and once used Amon to restore your divine domain in Lung City. Amon also erected statues of you in the various temples of Igut, allowing you to absorb souls. In terms of dermic powers and cultivation, your powers are already sufficient. But as the goddess of youth and love, what was the original meaning of your vow? What is your symbol in the mortal world? You did not seek proof in the temple, but in the rose garden. The garden has been verified. May I ask where the miracle of Wendy came from? 1. What did Gomang mean? Wendy's eternal youth wasn't only due to Amon's efforts. It was mainly because of the miraculous Murin's rose garden. Murin had built this rose garden. There were flowers that didn't wilt in the 4 seasons, and it was far away from the troubles of the mortal world. It also had magical powers that silently blessed Wendy. This divine palace contained the wishes of its creator. Murin's rose garden was so miraculous. Wendy was pure and had a clear mind. She didn't awaken her origins, but she silently accepted the blessings. It was like a rebirth, even though she was still a mortal. Wasn't this the world that the goddess of youth and love sought proof of? Seeing Wendy today meant that Murin had already done it. Going back to the previous analogy, some people could create a miraculous painting and travel the mountains and rivers in the painting, but immortals pursued the technique of the brush and not the painting itself. Now this painting and the person in the painting were present. It was the Wendy in the rose garden. Then Murin, who created this miracle, naturally possessed a realm similar to that of a true immortal. Why didn't Murin realize it herself? This ancient god was still stuck in the confusion of the creator. She also opened up a rose garden in heaven, but the angels in heaven all enjoyed eternal youth, and no changes could be seen. Moreover, the achievement of an archangel was not dependent on heaven to open up a closed world. This was a new guidance given by Amon, which was different from the original Anunnaki divine kingdom. Murin could already become an archangel, but if she wanted to truly become an archangel, she still needed this final self-awakening. Murin quietly pinched Amon beside her and secretly said in her soul, My God, you bad boy, why didn't you enlighten me? Amon quietly replied, This kind of self-awakening, in fact, I don't need to say another word. When Wendy leaves the rose garden and enters heaven, your quest will naturally be complete. I didn't expect these 2 children to come today, so it is fate that they have enlightened you. Just as they spoke, the aura emitted by Murin and the entire rose garden quietly underwent an indescribable change. In just a moment, she had become an archangel from heaven to the human world. Murin smiled happily. 2 guests from afar, how should I thank you? I heard that you are here in search of strange flowers and herbs. There are many in my rose garden. You can take whatever you like. As long as you have the ability, you can even move this rose garden away. One Jinshui also smiled happily and waved her little hand. We are just a manifestation of a thought. And although we are in the realm of great magic, we do not have the power of immortals, so we do not have the ability to move this paradise back to Kunlun. One Gomang frowned and said, Are you serious? One Murin nodded and said, Of course I am serious. One Gomang then turned to ask Zhenshui, Do you like it here? One Zhenshui also nodded. Of course I like it. One Gomang then said to Murin, I can't move the rose garden, but I have to thank you for your kindness. As a token of gratitude, I will demonstrate to you the mysterious methods of immortals. As he spoke, Gomang suddenly reached out towards Murin, as if to launch some kind of attack. But Murin and Amon sat still. The strange aura of this archangel and the entire rose garden seemed to be grasped in Gomang's hand, condensing into a strange object. It was half the height of a man and seemed to be made of pure, transparent crystal. It was long and slender in the middle and curved at both ends. The bottom was the base, and the top was like a plate that held water. The whole thing looked like an exceptionally exquisite crystal plate without any impurities. Gomang placed it on the ground beside him. The magic formation that enveloped the rose garden, the space where the rose garden was located, and the prayers contained in the rose garden that Murin had created fused seamlessly with the crystal plate. Scanning the crystal plate with a detection spell was equivalent to scanning the entire rose garden. After the crystal plate was placed, a plate of clear water condensed in it. Gomang pointed at the plate of clear water and said, This is a true immortal creation. It contains the essence of the rose garden's spiritual pivot. A person with a pure heart can sense this prayer and see it. Drinking it can preserve one's youth. One Amurin exclaimed, This is too miraculous. Aren't you a manifestation of a wisp of your mind? Without any immortal dermic powers? How did you do it? One Gomang shook his head. What's so miraculous about it to you? It's not my achievement but yours. I'm only turning illusory into reality, condensing the spiritual pivot here into this object. The spring of youth in this plate isn't a manifestation of my dermic powers, but a manifestation of the blessings of the rose garden. Only with this magical rose garden can I condense the spring of youth. And this Wendy has never drunk it like this. Isn't it preserving one's youth as well? One Murin praised. Spring of youth, what a good name. I'm not talking about this spring, but your hand. One Jinshui said with a smile. Brother Gomang's hand is adept at catching the tail of the wind and absorbing the myriad dharma in the world. Do you now know how impressive it is? Every immortal's cultivation level is different. Although Brother Gomang has yet to become a golden immortal, his means are unique. You don't have to find it too miraculous. It's just another way to display your achievements. One Gabriel narrowed his eyes and suddenly interjected. Gomang, can this spring of youth have the same miraculous effects if placed elsewhere? One Gomang shook his head. No, this isn't my work, but Murin's. What I've conjured is just a means. One Gabriel asked again. Then how can it be done? One Gomang thought for a moment before answering. Have an achievement that isn't inferior to Murin's. Understand its miraculous effects. Find another grotto heaven, cast a spell, and place the spiritual pivot there. Those with pure hearts can see the spring of youth. That's equivalent to creating another rose garden. If that's all, it's just a beautiful plate. When he then turned to ask Zhenshui, Do you like the spring of youth? We can take it away. Zhenshui shook her head. It's such a beautiful thing, just leave it here. If we take it away, it won't be the spring of youth anymore. Besides, the spring of youth is useless to us. One Zhenshui was speaking the truth. The spring of youth sounded miraculous, but it was useless to oracles who had passed the test of endless life. It was even more useless to those who had transcended eternal life. Furthermore, the requirement to place it was so high that it would just be a crystal plate once it left the rose garden. Gomang waved his hand. Then leave it here for now. One Wendy clapped. Thank you for placing such a beautiful spring here. Gomang smiled. No need to thank me. It's here to begin with, and you've already drunk from it. I'm only letting you see it. Rather than thanking me, Why not thank Morin? It symbolizes this archangel's request for confirmation. 1-1 Morin said in embarrassment. I don't know how to thank you for such a demonstration. Gomang replied. Didn't you say that I could take any flower I wanted? I'll go find out what I need now. He waved his sleeves, and the silver light turned into 2 little bees, buzzing as they flew into the bushes. Chapter 335. However, Zhen Shui was a golden immortal after all. She spoke very directly and wasn't like Gomang, who was restricted in his questions. He would answer if he wanted to and not if he didn't want to. Amon still had some questions to ask her, so he said with a smile, Mr. Gomang, take your time searching for flowers in the rose garden. Immortal Truewater, you are at the golden immortal realm. I wonder if you can enlighten me on the wonders of incarnation? There was a method that Amon had never tried. Marduk had once incarnated as Darius, and Zeus had once come to the mortal realm to become King Leone of Gabados. The 2 children in front of Hichiawa were formed from the thoughts of 2 immortals, which was clearly different from Darius or Leone's situation. In fact, such a method was a strange manifestation of thoughts. Even Morin could try it, much less Amon. It was just through a different method. However, Amon should be able to slash out an incarnation like Darius, but not Morin. This meant that Truewater had reached this realm in the 2 children, but Gomang did not. Amon naturally had to ask Truewater. However, Truewater shook her head. I have never slashed out an incarnation, so there is no proof. She rejected Amon's question. She had the ability, but she had never used such methods, so there was nothing to tell Amon. Gomang took the initiative to say, Amon, you have proven yourself to be the Lord of Heaven and a quasi-golden immortal. You can slash out an incarnation, but it depends on what you wish for. His words were filled with the wit of an immortal as he answered Amon's question in great detail. Gomang did not directly explain what happened with Darius and Leone. Instead, he introduced what he knew about the incarnations of golden immortals who wished to undergo the manifestation tribulation to become a golden immortal. At this stage, there were no supreme techniques that could be imparted. For example, for Amon's current disciples, Amon could still tell them how to cultivate the power of the origin step by step. However, at the level of the Lord of Heaven, there was no specific cultivation method that could be imparted. Everything depended on one's own knowledge and understanding, and the guide could only be enlightened by fate. Amon was like that, and so was Zeus. Amon had a deep understanding of this because he was a pioneer himself. His guide was Nietzsche, but Nietzsche was not a god, only a level 8 magician. Amon's travels in the human world were also for learning. In a sense, Aristotle or Aesop were also his teachers. However, these teachers would not directly teach him the cultivation of the gods. Everything would still depend on Amon's own thinking and witnessing. In that case, the golden immortal / incarnation was also a very important cultivation technique. It was not the usual transformation of a clone to walk in the human world. It had all kinds of predestined laws, and was related to a wish. Sitting in front of Gomang was Amon's true body. The golden immortal's Dharmakaya would remain in the eternal world, while the incarnation would come to the mortal world to do something or fulfill a wish. They either accumulated some kind of merit, or severed some kind of karma. As for the identity and abilities of this incarnation in the human world, it depended on the golden immortal's wish. After the wish was fulfilled or a certain cultivation was perfected, the golden immortal could retract the incarnation. It was also possible that the incarnation failed in what it was doing in the human world, or the incarnation was destroyed, and all previous efforts were wasted. When the golden immortal used an incarnation to travel the world, if the Dharmakaya came to the human world, it would merge with the incarnation, and at that time, people would also see the immortal himself. Upon hearing this, Amon roughly understood that Darius was Marduk's incarnation, but when he saw Darius, Marduk's Dharmakaya had descended to the human world, and the person drinking with him in the tavern was actually Marduk. As for King Leonio of Kabata, he was not the incarnation of Zeus. According to Gomang's explanation, that was the immortal's Dharmakaya returning to samsara. Amon asked again, what does it mean to return to samsara with the Dharmakaya? Gomang frowned. It's not like you haven't seen it before. Didn't that cat of yours, Anu who helped you, and that goddess of justice Themis all do it? And none of them have become a golden immortal. Actually, as long as an immortal wishes, they can do it. It just depends on what you want to do. But after becoming a golden immortal, there's no need to return to samsara with the Dharmakaya. Under normal circumstances, it's enough to cut out the incarnation. The so-called returning to samsara referred to those who had transcended eternal life and chose to return to the human world with the identity of an ordinary living being, living through the process of life anew. Because the purpose of coming to the human world was different, the guidance left in the soul was different. While listening to the immortal's words, Gomang introduced the 3 situations in which the immortal's Dharmakaya would return to samsara. The first was to return to samsara, and when this life ended, the immortal would return to the heavens. This was the situation that Amon saw for Schrödinger, Misfi, Goliath, and Leonio. The second situation was very special. The immortal swore a great vow, and if the vow was not fulfilled, they would be reincarnated. After this life ended, they would become another living being through the method of soul rebirth until their wish was fulfilled. This choice was also a huge test for the immortal, because there was the worry of falling into samsara forever. Those who had transcended eternal life would rarely do this unless it was necessary. On the other hand, without the true immortal materialization realm, the immortal would not be able to use this method to return to samsara. The third situation was very rare, and only a golden immortal with the beer transformation technique could do it. Not only would it return to the cycle of samsara, but it would also be a new beginning as immortal. If one was lucky enough to transcend eternal life, they would not return to the heavens, but become another immortal. When a golden immortal swore to leave, the golden immortal world he created would also disappear, which was equivalent to giving up everything he had and starting from scratch. If he was lucky enough to fulfill his wish, he would once again seek confirmation that was equivalent to becoming a golden immortal, and he would regain his previous immortal insight, obtaining the confirmation of 2 kinds of achievements at the same time. But his identity had already changed. The reason why Gomang knew this was because he had heard of golden immortals becoming bodhisattvas, and bodhisattvas becoming golden immortals. As for why they made such a decision, he could only ask the immortal themselves. The third situation sounded absolutely incomprehensible, but Amon could completely understand it, and even answered one of his questions. Amon finally understood completely. Where did Anu and Allah go? These 2 gods of creation had made a vow to recultivate. In fact, the gods of creation also had the beer transformation technique, and their achievements had also reached what Gomang called golden immortal. It was just that they took a wrong step. With Amon's help, Anu and Allah were able to abandon their divine kingdoms and return to the mortal realm in the form of a new soul. They were now recultivating through the cycle of samsara. They did not have to do this, but they still made this choice. As for whether they could fulfill their vows, and if they could, what kind of gods would they become? No one could say for sure. Amon might never see them again. There might also be a day when another king of heaven, or a golden immortal, or a bodhisattva would come to Amon and say, "I am Anu from back then." After hearing this, Amon said, "Mr. Gomang, thank you for your guidance today. I've had too many questions, but I've finally been enlightened." Gomang returned the greeting with cupped fists. "There's no need to be so polite. Your achievements are above mine, but you have never heard of the Tao of Immortals. Now that you've witnessed it, you can naturally see through it. And I'm not a god here, so I've benefited greatly from your experiences." Gomang's words were very fair. Although he had answered so many of Amon's questions, Amon had already told Gomang and Zhen Shui almost everything he had witnessed before he asked any questions. There was no need for Gomang to ask him one by one. Following that, Gomang waved his hand. "If you ask any deeper, I won't be able to answer. Actually, my answers just now were not verified by me. I've only seen it before and have some understanding of it. Let's end today's discussion here." Zhen Shui put down his cup. "Brother Gomang, are we leaving?" Gomang stood up. "We've been drinking the entire day. It's time to end." Amon urged him to stay. This is a huge rose garden with countless rare plants. Why the rush to leave? You can search slowly. It's good to stay a few more days. Gomang shook his head. I've already searched everywhere. I wish to take away a stalk of auspicious grass. With a wave of his hand, the tiny bee in his sleeve transformed into the form of a bird. It flapped its wings and flew back with a stalk of grass in its beak. The bird flew into Gomang's sleeve and disappeared, leaving the stalk of grass in Gomang's hand. Zhen Shui clapped happily. This is the phoenix plume knot. I didn't expect to find it here. The stalk of grass had already borne fruit. The fruits were slightly larger than grapes and were bright yellow in color. There were a total of 7 of them, and they were lined up at the top of the auspicious grass. The slender stems were fan-shaped, and from afar, they looked like the feathers on a peacock's head. Gomang smiled as well. This phoenix plume knot happens to bear fruit. It's perfect to take it back. With that said, he waved his hand and stored the newly found auspicious grass into his silver sleeve. Muren saw that Aman was clearly trying to keep the 2 children. When she saw Gomang's sleeve, an idea came to her. Mr. Gomang, didn't you say that you want Gabriel to compensate for the hole in your sleeve? Why don't you stay here as a guest and have some fun and stroll around? You can leave after your sleeve is sewn up. This was a good excuse, but the moment she said that, she heard Aman's voice in her soul. Don't mention that sleeve. If Gabriel can't compensate for it, neither can we. Aman could see clearly that the silver robe Gomang wore was no ordinary robe. It wasn't even an ordinary divine artifact. Instead, it was a fusion of the immortal's body and soul, similar to the god's tear that had fused with Ammonius' body. Back when Aman passed the trial of fate, judgment of Armageddon, he had unintentionally fused a god's tear with his body, allowing him to produce that faint golden teardrop. Although the origins of the robe Gomang wore were unknown, it was similar in its mystical aspects. There was probably no material in the world that could mend the tear, not even a thread that could be refined into a divine artifact. Only the immortal, who had transformed into Gomang with a wisp of his will, could retract it and condense his body and soul again. Only then could the tear be mended. The silver-feathered sleeve and the immortal's body and soul were a manifestation of great divine powers. How was Gabriel to compensate for it? Gomang didn't mention it again when he left. Aman also reminded Muren not to speak further. Muren tactfully shut up, but Gabriel stood up without any sense of propriety. Mr. Gomang, I was rash and damaged your sleeve. I'm willing to repair it for you. Muren hurriedly pushed Gabriel's shoulder. You are a warrior and have never held a needle or thread before. How would you know such work? I think you should invite Mr. Gomang to be a guest and treat him well. Gomang had already led Truewater out. He turned back to look at Gabriel with a faint smile. It's good that you have such intentions. I won't fuss over it. Back at the banquet, the child spoke with confidence and composure like an adult. He looked like he was having fun, but the final smile he gave before leaving was clearly the expression and tone of a 5 or 6-year-old child. Aman suddenly said in his soul, Mr. Gomang, I have one last question. How did you manage to sneak into the rose garden? Gomang replied silently in his soul, I have my own unique cultivation arts. I don't impart them to anyone who isn't my disciple. It's difficult for you to imitate it, but it's not difficult for you to understand the profound principles behind it. Aman, let me ask you, how did you enter the Olympian divine domain back then? It might seem like 2 different matters, but the principles are the same. Aman was taken aback as though he was ruminating over Gomang's words. As for the 2 children, they had already walked out of the rose garden. Gomang and Truewater left the rose garden and traveled with the wind in the desolate lands of the Saya Highlands. Truewater suddenly said, Brother Gomang, the way you answered his questions and demonstrated the profundities of materialization would have dissuaded anyone else and led them into the path of immortals. However, that Aman was only asking questions. He wasn't influenced by you. Gomang answered. That Aman sent out a thought before he asked questions. He showed me all of his experiences in seeking confirmation. It seemed polite, but his intention was to guide us. He showed his kingdom of heaven. It was to guide me into his kingdom of heaven. How direct. Alas, the Tao is different. He never knew the transcendence of immortals. Truewater added. His guidance obviously couldn't move your thoughts, but this person's thoughts are indeed extremely tenacious. Back then, he had yet to transcend the heavenly punishment, and was only an earth immortal. When the infinite light passed by, the Lion King left upon hearing the Buddhist Dharma, but Amon remained unmoved. Later on, the Scorpion King, who was at the same table as him, was led into the kingdom of heaven by him. Brother Gomang, you have the profundities of materialization when discussing the Tao with others, but it's useless against him. Gomang grinned. That might not be the case, but my current realm isn't sufficient. As for the infinite light, that's not something I can say. It's still unknown how he met Amon. And the profundities of Taishang Wangqing and Truewater are profound. After Gomang and Truewater left, Amon put away the tent. Beside the flowering shrubs, on the grassy slope beside the stream, there was an additional spring of youth placed there. It symbolized that the two immortals had been here. Wendy squatted down and caressed the exquisite crystal plate, marveling at it. She even took a sip of the spring water. Amon looked in the direction where the two immortals disappeared, deep in thought. After a long while he said, Murin, I've gained some enlightenment. I'll be cultivating for a period of time. Gabriel, return to the kingdom of heaven. Although what happened yesterday was a misunderstanding, you have the responsibility of a guardian angel. You weren't at fault when you struck Gomang with the blade of Ziji. Amon's words were clear. Gomang's accidental intrusion into the rose garden was an accident, and as a guardian angel, Gabriel would still have to help in such situations in the future. Gabriel bowed and returned to the kingdom of heaven. Murin asked again, if you want to cultivate, aren't you going to the kingdom of heaven? Amon answered, I don't plan on going to the kingdom of heaven. Instead, I'll go to the cave in the Garden of Eden. That's where my foundation lies, the starting point of the path of exploring the power of origins. I didn't expect to have such a fortuitous encounter. Speaking of which, I have to thank Yelena and the other gods who forced me out of Olympus. They thought that they had succeeded, but instead helped me greatly. Otherwise, I might have missed out on those two immortals, and I wouldn't have gotten what I have today. He wondered if Yelena and the other gods would vomit blood in anger when they heard Amon's words. If Amon was still in Macedonia and stayed in Olympus as a mortal, he might not have been aware of what happened in the rose garden. Gomang and Truewater had only entered by mistake, and there wouldn't be a real conflict. Murin and the others would be able to solve the problem. It was just that Amon had missed a good opportunity to seek the Tao without realizing it himself. Yelena's scheme to drive Amon away had helped him instead. Amon left the rose garden and went to the Garden of Eden. Moses and the other oracles came to pay their respects. Now the oracles in the Garden of Eden were not just the disciples personally guided by Amon. Over the years, the angels in the kingdom of heaven had guided new oracles in the world, and a few of them came from Selang. After receiving the guidance of the angels, they realized that Aloha and Amon, whom they had always believed in, were the same god. Amon was still the main god of Igut, and the original Eru had now become the paradise of the angels in the world. Over the years, a new group of oracles had been guided. Amon ordered his disciples, the oracles of the original pantheons, and the new oracles guided by the angels, as long as they had not yet transcended eternal life, to come to the Garden of Eden to listen to his preaching. This was the only time Amon had publicly preached in the world. Half a month later, all the oracles from all over the world gathered and listened to Amon's preaching in the Garden of Eden for 3 days under the leadership of Moses. 3 days later, after Amon's preaching, a spectacular miracle happened in the Garden of Eden. His personal disciples, Moses, George, Yao Liao, Elmar, Raphael, Uriel and Sylvia, ushered in the test of fate, the judgment of the end at almost the same time. They successfully passed the test and entered the kingdom of heaven, becoming angels who had transcended eternal life. And Murin's elf-maid Shubra, and the original Ennead, the beetle god Kepri, also passed the test and entered the kingdom of heaven. This was an inconceivable coincidence, but its occurrence was not without reason. Whether these people were personally guided by Amon or came from the original pantheons, their cultivation of the power of origin had long been accumulated enough. and they only needed to see the end of the road in the world. Aman summoned the oracles to preach for 3 days, and it happened to be the opportunity for them to take the last step. Among the disciples personally guided by Aman, except for the dead John and Abel, and Cain who betrayed Aman, only Madanzo had not yet transcended eternal life and was still by the side of King Alexander of Macedon. Aman vaguely knew when Madanzo would face the test, but he was not sure whether Madanzo could successfully pass the test. Chapter 336. According to the traditions of the various divine clans on the continent, only gods who had transcended eternal life could guide the divine emissaries on earth, and only by becoming such an emissary could one have a chance to transcend eternal life. But Aman made a change, and left behind another way of guidance. Whether the believers on earth were divine emissaries or not, as long as they guarded the faith left by Aman, practiced the power of origin to the end, and passed the final test, they would naturally be able to enter the kingdom of heaven, and the angels who would receive them in the kingdom of heaven would be Michael and Raphael. This change began in the city of Salem. The priests of Salem called themselves mages, and what they practiced was not simply magic. What they first awakened was the power of the origin, but according to the characteristics of each person, they focused on different aspects of their practice. On the day that the preaching in the Garden of Eden ended, Aman, as the king of Igut, gave the final oracle and announced the secret of the power of origin to the priests of the shrines in Igut. From this day on, the path to the gods was no longer monopolized by the various divine clans. Those who obtained this secret and could awaken the power of origin might not necessarily believe in Aman, and most of them would not achieve great things at all, and those who eventually transcended eternal life were even fewer. But Aman did not consider this problem, he only left behind guidance. Those who truly followed the guidance and followed Aman's agreement, no matter how slim the chances were, the path to the kingdom of heaven was already in front of them. On the other hand, it was not easy to awaken the power of origin, and even Aman himself could not awaken it for Wendy. If the people of the world did not have great achievements and opportunities, they might still awaken the power of their bloodline or magic respectively, no different from traditional warriors or mages, and this was something that Aman could not change. After arranging all this, Aman gave another order. Among the angels of the kingdom of heaven, if anyone could also verify the achievements of the Lord of the kingdom of heaven, they would be named Archangel. Then he entered the big cave in the Garden of Eden to cultivate. The cave was located in an independent mountain cliff, connected to other places in the Garden of Eden by the Sea of Clouds and the Rainbow Bridge. When the flood broke out in the plains of Duk, Schrödinger guided the Ark of the Underworld and brought Aman here for the first time, discovering the ruins left behind by Bear and Trony, and obtaining the secret of the power of two sides. It could be said that this was the starting point of Aman's path of seeking proof. The current king of heaven had returned to the big cave to cultivate alone. If nothing unexpected happened, no one knew how long Aman would cultivate here. A few years, a few decades, a few centuries, or even 1,000 years were possible, until the first archangel appeared in his kingdom of heaven. At that time, Aman would have to seek proof of the true God of gods. However, everything did not go as Aman wished. In fact, he only stayed in the cave for 3 years before he suddenly left. After leaving the Garden of Eden, Aman did not appear in the human world or the kingdom of heaven. Instead, he appeared in heaven. Many people may not be able to tell the difference between heaven and heaven, thinking that they were the same place, but in fact they were not. Both heaven and hell were the underworld created by Aman, the places where the souls of the dead were received after the death of his believers. It was just that Aman used a method of projection to cleverly project the scene of heaven into heaven, so that those souls who entered heaven could see heaven, as if they were also in it. But they were still only souls after death in the human world, and did not enter the eternal transcendence of immortality. The two angels guarding heaven and hell were currently Kela and Nergal, who were also the gods of the underworld of the original Anunnaki divine clan. However, this time Aman personally welcomed a soul in heaven, because the deceased was Aesop. The Aesop that Aman saw in heaven was not an old man, but rather resembled him when he first saw him in the Saya desert. When the soul came to heaven, It was the youngest, most handsome, and radiant appearance, and it made up for all the regrets of his life. If it was a lame man, his leg would be as good as new, and if it was a blind man, he would be able to open his eyes and see the light. Amon smiled and said, "Old friend, you are early." Aesop stepped forward and bowed. "My God, it's time for me to come and see you. I don't know how to describe my gratitude. I thought it would be tragic to face the end of life calmly, but when I came here, it was you who welcomed me." Amon's tone sank slightly, and he said with a slight reproach, "Why didn't you pray to me? I could have come and saved you." Aesop smiled and said, "My faith is very clear. Everything I do is the choice of my faith. There is no need to pray to the gods for anything. It was not until the moment I was executed that I prayed to my God, and then I saw you. I have no regrets in this life." Amon shook his head gently and said, "The ending of coming to heaven is of course not a regret, but what happened to you when you left the human world is a regret. You are my friend, one of the most respected elders. No matter what, I should not sit back and watch that happen. But during this period of time, due to special reasons, I did not pay attention to everything in the human world, until I heard your last prayer, then I understood what happened. Aesop, welcome to heaven. And I will go to Micheli to retrieve what I should take back. Your soul can stay here, or you can choose whether to go to the human world to be reborn." Aesop asked, "My God, are you going to the Heaton Peninsula as Amon?" Amon nodded and said, "Yes, I am going to punish the person who framed you. In my way, this is also the end of my relationship with the Olympian gods. Madanzo and I sent you back to your hometown to satisfy your wish to enjoy your old age. But we did not expect that you would encounter such an encounter in the last moments of your life. If Madanzo was still in Heaton, he would not allow such a thing to happen, but unfortunately, he went to war with Alexander. The Macedonian army has just passed through the Saya Desert, where you and I first met." Aesop bowed and replied, "Although heaven is good, it is not true transcendence. I have come here to see you, and I am still willing to choose the rebirth of my soul. But before I leave, I would like to see what you have done in Heaton." Amon nodded and said, "Then you wait in heaven, don't worry, I still have to welcome the arrival of another old friend." The other old friend that Amon mentioned was a high-spirited warrior, the former lord of Cape, Roddick. Seeing that Roddick had also come to heaven, Aesop greeted him with a smile and said, "My lord, I heard that you have achieved the achievement of a supreme warrior. It seems that you have come a little early." Roddick also smiled and said, "In terms of age, I am not young, and I have enjoyed a lot in the human world. If you can come, why can't I?" As he spoke, he also stepped forward and bowed to Amon. Aesop joked again, "I have heard that a supreme warrior can refuse the invitation of the underworld and choose to leave on his own. Why did you still come? Are you so sure that you will not go to hell?" Roddick asked in reply, "Aesop, have I done anything wrong to you that you want me to go to hell so much? In fact, I have been praised by the people all my life, but I have some regrets." Amon asked, "Roddick, you were born as the heir to the Lord of Cape, and later became a supreme warrior, envied by the world, and held the position of Prime Minister of Igut for many years. The real power in your hands is even greater than that of the pharaoh. What regrets do you have?" Roddick replied, "Even so, didn't I still come to see you in heaven? It was not easy to come here. I didn't come directly to you. I came through hell. Just before I died, you just sent down an oracle and announced the secret of the power of the origin. I wanted to practice it, but it was too late in this life. Isn't it a pity?" Amon smiled. "At least you know this path before the end of your life, so it is not too much of a pity. In fact, with your foundation, even if I had guided you to the power of the origin from the beginning, you would have barely achieved great success in the end. There is no hope for you to pass the test of endless arising and ceasing, let alone pass the final test and transcend eternal life. It is better to be the Lord of Cape and Prime Minister. But Aesop is also right, you did not die on the battlefield, so it is indeed a little early." Roddick sighed. "There are so many things to deal with every day, worrying about the affairs of the country. My God, don't you know? Alexander has crossed the straits with the Macedonian army, has annexed the former Hittite kingdom, and is about to approach Igut. Amon's expression could not be seen whether he was happy or worried. What other news do you have to tell me? Roddick said. Do I still need to tell you specifically? When your soul comes to the underworld, you will naturally learn everything. There are no secrets to speak of. Amon smiled again. Yes, you should know that it is meaningless to sigh here. When I come to heaven, I will naturally know that the army of Pots has withdrawn from the plains of Duk, that David has established Salem, and that Madanzo has sent you a letter conveying Alexander's promise that when he comes to Igut, he will claim to be the son of Amon. Is that so? Roddick smiled bitterly. Since you know everything in a flash, why are you still asking me? Alexander will claim to be the son of Amon, and will come to Igut to offer sacrifices to you and rebuild the temple of Isis. My God, when did you have such a son? Who did you have him with? Aesop interjected again. Roddick, when did you learn to speak like this? Be careful that the gods throw you back to hell. Roddick chuckled and said, Actually, I came to heaven only to offer the imprint of my soul in this life to the gods, and I am satisfied to see the gods. I will also choose the new life of my soul, but I still want to wait in heaven to see if Alexander can fulfill his promise. At this moment, Kella came over and bowed to Amon. My God, many of your old friends have also come from hell. Amon waved his hand and said, Then let them stay where they are. Heaven and hell are not the final destination of the soul, they are just stations on the way to a new life. The only difference is whether they will be liberated or not. Aesop, Rod, it is fate that you can meet here. Take your time to talk. I will go to the human world. Roddick's soul came to heaven because he died of old age, but Aesop did not die a natural death. He was executed by the court of the city of Migilai. This tragedy was actually related to the Delphi oracle, which represented the will of the Olympian gods. And there was also a god behind it, which aroused Amon's anger. Yelena and the other Olympian gods had not given up on him, and they must force him to voluntarily terminate his cooperation with Zeus and declare a complete break. If Yelena, Apollo, and the others faced Amon directly, no one was a match for him, but as long as Amon was in the human world, he would have a weakness. They had used many means to involve Madanzo, Murin, and Philip II, all of whom were related to Amon. When Amon left the Hetan Peninsula, the Olympian gods did not give up. This time, it was Amon's most respected elder, Aesop. Aesop's experience could not be said to be completely innocent, and the story had to be told from the beginning. After the assassination of Philip II, Alexander became the king of Macedon. Madanzo accidentally said something, and the young king vaguely guessed that the assassination of his father was related to Yelena. He could not punish Yelena, but he could punish the Eurone League. Soon after he succeeded to the throne, Alexander led his army to launch a fierce attack on the Eurone League. Although the Eurone League was already weak, this battle would determine the survival of the city-states, so they gathered their greatest strength to resist. Alexander broke through the city of Thebes, which had the most tenacious resistance, and sold all the 30,000 citizens of the city who had always opposed Macedon as slaves. He burned the city to the ground, leaving only the temple of Zeus and the residence of a bard whom he respected. Such an iron-fisted method greatly deterred the other city-states of the Eurone League. When Alexander's army moved south, the city-states surrendered almost without resistance, lest they suffer the same disaster. Alexander smoothly destroyed the Eurone League, and the era of divided city-states on the Hetan Peninsula came to an end. When the Pots Empire heard that Philip II had been assassinated, it was relieved for a while, thinking that the biggest threat on the Hetan Peninsula had been removed. In the end, Alexander, who succeeded the throne, was even more talented and bold than his father. In the second year after the unification of the Hetan Peninsula, Alexander had already formed an unprecedentedly large army. He crossed the promontory and attacked the 3 provinces of the Pots Empire, which were the territories of the former Hittite kingdom. At this time, the Pots Empire was no longer the same as it was in the era of Darius. Although the territory was vast, there was frequent civil strife, and the country was declining day by day. The current emperor of the Pots Empire was Darius III. Under his rule, the Potts Empire was far less stable and tolerant than the era of Cyrus or Darius. Conflicts between the various tribes in the country occurred from time to time, and the people in the occupied areas had been planning to break free from the slavery of the Potts people. The Potts Empire relied on military suppression to maintain a fragile rule. Once it encountered a more powerful military attack from the outside world, this great empire would immediately collapse. Alexander mobilized a total of 8 legions, including 5,000 cavalry and more than 30,000 infantry with the Macedonian pike phalanx as the main force, to cross the promontory and attack. The Macedonian army regarded itself as the liberator, and received a lot of support from the local Hittite people. They advanced all the way with irresistible force, and finally fought a decisive battle with the army led by Darius III, the emperor of the Potts. The Macedonians flanked both sides with their cavalry, and the pike phalanx steadily advanced, and the Potts army was defeated. Darius III escaped in the chaos, and the Macedonian army chased him all the way to the west bank of the Euphrates River, completely occupying the territory of the former Hittite kingdom. As the Potts people retreated to the west bank of the Euphrates River, there was a temporary vacuum of ruling power on the plains of Duk, and the city of Salem under the rule of David Solomon took the opportunity to declare independence, forming the state of Salem. At that time, Alexander was already known as the Great Emperor of Macedon, and when he heard the news, he did not stop David Solomon. Instead, he sent an envoy to confer him the title of King of Salem, which could be considered as fulfilling his first promise to Madanzo. The defeated Darius III sent an envoy to Alexander to beg for peace, expressing his willingness to cede the land west of the Euphrates River to Macedon, and pay a large sum of war reparations. But Alexander refused the peace talks, and he demanded an unconditional surrender of the Potts people. But Alexander was not in a hurry to attack the hinterland of the Potts Empire. After the army rested and reorganized, it moved south along the coastline, crossing the Saya Desert and heading straight for Igut. Before reaching Igut, Alexander also asked Madanzo to send a letter to Roddik. As for the contents of the letter, Amon already knew. The expansion of the Macedonian Empire was, of course, part of Zeus' plan, and it had always been guided by his oracle. But Alexander's promise to Madanzo and the god of Igut was not what Yelena and the other Olympian gods wanted to see. Alexander brought Madanzo to lead the army to war, but the annual oracle ceremony of Delphi still had to be held. This was the 4th ceremony since Macedon occupied Delphi, and according to Alexander's plan, the next time he led the army back successfully, he would reform the tradition of the Delphi oracle, end the history of the separate temples, and build a main temple dedicated to Zeus, the father of the gods, in the main temple, and place the gods in the main temple to accompany the sacrifices. The oracle of Delphi would be issued by this main temple. However, Alexander did not have the time to return to his country to deal with this matter. This year's Delphi oracle was still announced by the Temple of Apollo. The city-states would send representatives to offer sacrifices, and the emissary representing the Maturi city-state was Aesop. To offer sacrifices to the gods, the offerings were placed on the altar. But the gods would not take away the symbolic offerings, they only accepted the prayers and praises of the people. The offerings of each city were for the temple, to be enjoyed by the priests, including a large number of livestock, slaves, valuable utensils, and the most substantial of which was, of course, a large sum of money. The gift prepared by the city of Medulla, which had always been rich in business, was a large sum of gold, which was raised by the city from the merchants of Medulla, and sent an envoy to Delphi on behalf of the city to offer to the temples in the holy land of Delphi. Chapter 337. After Amon left, Aesop lived a comfortable life in Mytilai. He was good friends with the famous sage Thales, and often went to the square of the shrine to chat with people. He was old and had nothing else to do but tell stories. He had been to all parts of the continent and experienced too many things. It was quite exciting to tell a few simple stories about his life. Many young people and children especially liked to listen to Aesop's stories. Gradually, Aesop telling stories in the square of the shrine became a scene in Mytilai. Aesop told people about his experiences and legends. The protagonist of the stories was not himself, but he often mentioned Ammon when he looked back on his experiences. From Egypt to the plains of Duk, including the former countries of the continent, Ammon left many legends. A young man who walked out of the mountains eventually became a legend in the world. Such an experience was very fascinating to the other young people in the world. People could not help but think that Aesop's former coachman was also called Ammon. Perhaps it was the name given by the old man, symbolizing the nostalgia of the past. At this time, no one realized that Ammonius had actually lived in Migilai. Aesop's story unknowingly influenced many people, and some young people even began to worship Ammon. This caused dissatisfaction among others, especially the priests of Migilai. When communicating with people in the square of the shrine, it was inevitable that they would be asked questions about the gods and beliefs. In the cities of Hilton, the atmosphere of conversation was quite open. Some people noticed that although Aesop was very rich, he never went to the shrine to offer sacrifices to the gods, nor did he participate in the rituals of the cities. Someone asked him, "Aesop, do you believe in the gods?" Aesop replied, "I have my God in my heart." Someone asked again, "Then why don't you go to the shrine to offer sacrifices?" Aesop asked in reply, "After hearing my story, do you still not understand where my God is?" Of course, the smart ones understood. Aesop did not directly say anything disrespectful to the gods, but the God in his heart was not in the temple on the square. Thus, some people deliberately distanced themselves from him, but there were still people who were willing to listen to his stories. Aesop was very eloquent. The stories he told were interesting and reasonable. His knowledge seemed to be endless. Finally, one day, a young man walked out of the temple and came before Aesop. Aesop actually knew him. He had seen him in his own shop before. He was the passerby who pointed at the statue and asked for the price. Ammon had once reminded Aesop that this person was Hermes who had come to the human world. Hermes said to Aesop, "Elder, can I make a request of you?" Aesop nodded with a smile and replied, "Young man, please speak." Hermes, "This is the temple square of Migilai, and the patron saint of this city is Hermes. When someone asks you if you believe in a god, shouldn't you give Hermes enough respect?" Aesop replied with a smile, "I did not answer that I did not believe in the existence of Hermes or the Olympian gods. Young man, when I saw you, I believed that they existed. But the belief that people asked about was not belief, but true belief and following in the heart. It was precisely because in the temple square, under the gaze of the gods, that I could not deceive myself. I did not deny people's belief in Hermes, nor did I directly answer my belief. This is already a sign of respect for the gods." Hermes stared at Aesop and said, "Can't you agree to a request? When people ask you again, you tell them that you believe in the gods. Even if you have a god in your heart, can't you go to the temple like others to offer sacrifices to Hermes? Even if you don't contribute your belongings, just attend the ceremony and salute. In that case, you will be more popular." Aesop did not answer Hermes's question directly. Instead, he told him the story of the wolf is coming. A child who was herding sheep on the mountain was bored and shouted that there was a wolf. The adults at the foot of the mountain rushed up to the mountain to fight the wolf, but they found that they had been deceived. A few days later, the wolf really came. The child shouted that there was a wolf, but no one came up to the mountain to save him. A few days later, the wolf really came. The child shouted that there was a wolf, but no one came up to the mountain to save him. The story was very short and finished in a few sentences. Then Aesop looked at Hermes with a smile and asked, "Is the wolf coming?" Hermes did not say a word and walked back to the temple with a straight face. He could not do anything to Aesop. He actually asked Aesop to pretend to believe in him, but Aesop asked him what was the point of pretending to believe in him and offering sacrifices? If people were like this, sooner or later, they would lose true belief, and the gods on the altar would no longer exist. Aesop's reasoning was very clear, and since Hermes was a god, he could no longer dwell on this issue with him. After a while, one day, Aesop was telling a group of young people in the square about the founding of the city of Salem in the plains of Duk, and the high priest of the Maturi shrine came over. The crowd saluted and dispersed, and Aesop also got up and saluted. "Honorable Lord, what can I do for you?" The high priest said. "I heard the voice of the emissary of the gods, saying that you are the most eloquent person in the city of Maturi. Why don't you use this talent to praise the gods? You have told so many stories, but I have never heard you praise the gods. The patron saint of our city symbolizes the glory of the city. Why don't you tell more about his legend?" Aesop spread his hands. "My lord, as you know, I left here when I was very young, and only returned to my hometown when I was old. I told what I had seen and heard in various places, but I have not heard much about the legend of Hermes." The high priest smiled kindly. "It doesn't matter. With your eloquence, you can tell so many wonderful legends. Why don't you use the name of Hermes and the gods? It is just a small trick, and it is also the hope of the gods." Aesop also smiled. "Then I will tell you a story about the gods. Zeus, the father of the gods, had a sudden idea one day to choose the most beautiful bird in the world to be the king of all birds. The crow knew that it looked ugly, so while the birds were washing by the water, it secretly picked up the most beautiful feathers they had fallen by the water and inserted them into its body. When Zeus came, the birds lined up to greet him, but found that the crow was the most beautiful. The birds were angry and took back the feathers that belonged to them, but the crow was still a crow. When Aesop's story was finished, the high priest shook his head after listening and said nothing more. He turned and walked into the shrine. Soon after, the city of Mytilai was conquered by Macedonia and came under the rule of the Kingdom of Macedonia, but it still retained the original shrine and the citizens' assembly to deal with the internal affairs of the city. Then the annual Delphi oracle ceremony on the Heaton Peninsula was coming, and the city of Mytilai attached great importance to this ceremony. The merchants paid a large amount of tax as a gift to the Delphi shrines, of which Aesop paid the most. It was not that Aesop believed in the Olympian gods, but because this was the decree of the city, the merchants had to pay this tax, and now Aesop was the richest merchant in Mytilai. The tax for the gift had been collected, and messengers had to be sent to Delphi to offer to the shrines. According to tradition, the priests of the shrines would gather the nobles and representatives of the citizens to elect messengers, and then offer sacrifices to the patron saint in the shrine of the city. This year's sacrificial ceremony had an additional content. According to the decree of the Kingdom of Macedonia, the father of the gods, Zeus, had to be offered first, and then the patron saint of the city. At this time, Hermes sent down an oracle, appointing the most eloquent Aesop of the city of Mytilai to go to Delphi, and the clever messenger would decide which god and which shrine the gold of the city of Mytilai should be offered to. It had to be a god that he thought was worthy of offering. Delphi was the holy land of the Olympian gods on earth, with many shrines of various sizes. In addition to the 12 main gods today, the ancient gods also had shrines here. A long time ago, the most important shrine here was the Temple of Themis, and now the main one was the Temple of Apollo, which was also the most magnificent of all the shrines in Delphi. In the near future, the Kingdom of Macedonia would build an even more magnificent main shrine in Delphi, breaking the historical tradition of no longer worshipping a single god, but worshipping Zeus, the father of the gods, with the Olympian gods as his companions. This year's Oracle of Delphi would still be issued by the Temple of Apollo, and the gold that Aesop brought with him should naturally be offered to the Temple of Apollo. The other shrines, large and small, should be more or less evenly distributed, to show respect to the gods and not to offend anyone. This was because the priests of Delphi were, in a sense, a group of interests, a symbol of the theocracy on the Heaton Peninsula. They could not ignore the other gods just because they valued one god, or they would offend the entire Delphi priest group. However, the status of the gods in the human world was different, so it was inevitable that each city would be a little snobbish. Under normal circumstances, every temple would be sacrificed, but the distribution would be decided according to the interests of the city. A smart emissary would know how to make the most of the limited gifts. This time, the oracle appointed Aesop as the messenger, and gave Aesop the right to decide. Aesop led the delegation of the city of Maduri to Delphi with a large amount of gold. He stayed in Delphi for more than 10 days, every day going to the gates of the shrines to see the people offering sacrifices and the movements of the priests, But he never offered the gold. Just the day before the ceremony, on the road to an ancient shrine halfway up the mountain, a tumbled rock blocked half the mountain road. This place had been in disrepair for years. The rock was so big that people had to walk around it when they passed it. Aesop sat not far away and watched. After dusk, he finally stood up. At this time, a priestess came up from the foot of the mountain. This woman was strong, and it took her a long time to move the rock away and find gravel to fill the pit in the road. It was already dark by this time, and Aesop watched her walk into the temple of Themis. The next day, Aesop came to the temple of Themis with a plate full of gold, found the priestess and said, "This is a gift from me to the shrine on behalf of the city of Maduri. It is enough to rebuild the mountain road leading here." The priestess frowned and said, "Kind and generous man, you should first say to offer it to the gods." Aesop smiled and said, "It is offered to the shrine where the gods are, but the person who uses it is the priest of the shrine." The priestess said again, "But that road does not only lead to this shrine." Aesop put the gold on the altar and saluted the priestess. "But I only see you." The next day, the Delphic oracle ceremony was officially held, and as an emissary appointed by the city, Aesop also attended the ceremony and saluted to the gods. The so-called sacrifice had two meanings. One was to salute according to the ceremony, and the other was to offer a gift to the shrine. Aesop only attended the ceremony and did not deliver the gold. It was in the Delphic oracle of this year that Apollo announced that among the emissaries of the cities, someone had blasphemed and offended the gods and would be punished by the gods. The priests of Delphic would send emissaries to find this person and make formal accusations against him. When the priest announced the news, there was an uproar at the ceremony, and people were discussing who the emissary was and would be punished for blasphemy. After the ceremony, Aesop set off for Maduri. The plate full of gold he gave to the priestess was only a small part of the gift, and most of the gold was brought back untouched, which naturally angered the priests of Delphic. The entourage of the emissary was also very uneasy, but the oracle had given Aesop the right to decide, so they could not interfere. The gold that was offered to the gods was brought back to the city. This was something that had never happened in the history of Mytilene. People were worried when they heard the news. Aesop had offended both the gods and the priests of the Holy Land of Delphi, which might bring disaster to the city. Aesop was questioned by the council of nobles and the representatives of the citizens in the shrine of the city, who wanted him to explain his actions. Aesop explained, "I did not violate the oracle. It was in this shrine that the oracle gave me the right to make a choice and to offer the gold to the gods in shrines that I thought were worthy of offering. I have already answered that I have my God, and I do not want to say his name here. I was also loyal to my duty, and as an emissary of Maduri, I came to Delphic and spent 10 days only to find one priest who really needed this offering. As for the rest of the gold, I brought it back to the city. It was collected by the merchants of Maduri, and since there was no offering, it should be returned to the merchants." The people's emotions were boiling, and even the merchants who took out the gold felt terrified and angry when they found that the gold they had offered was returned by Aesop. In their view, this was equivalent to losing the opportunity to pray to the gods, or the gods had rejected their prayers. All of this was caused by Aesop, and they all cursed Aesop and jointly filed a complaint with the court of the city, demanding that Aesop be severely punished. There were also bystanders who thought themselves clever that Aesop brought back the gold because of greed and selfishness, and that he returned the gold to the merchants to buy their hearts, because the one who paid the most among these merchants was Aesop himself. Aesop argued, "You want to accuse me in the name of faith, but you do not know the price to pay for protecting faith. The oracle here gave me the right to make a choice, and the choice I made was in line with my faith, and your accusations are the price I have to pay. The oracle made this arrangement, but the people who accuse me are you." Just then, an emissary sent by the Holy Land of Delphi came to Maduri, and when he saw this scene, he determined that the blasphemer pointed out in the Delphi oracle was Aesop, and publicly accused him. In this case, it was useless for Aesop to defend himself, and he was sent to the court of the city for trial. The trial had its own procedures, and the emissary from Delphi was called Antonio. The Delphi oracle did not mention Aesop's name, and Antonio wanted to accuse him, to prove to the world that Aesop was that person. So Antonio investigated many of Aesop's past in Maduri, and made a formal accusation against him, promoting a new god, poisoning and corrupting the younger generation. If this accusation was established, combined with Aesop's performance at the Delphi ceremony, then it was certain that Aesop would be the one who blasphemed and offended the gods according to the oracle. The judge presiding over the trial was a friend of Thales, and before making a verdict, he allowed Aesop to defend himself. Aesop did not explain what he had done, but told another story in court, about a wolf and a sheep. The wolf was upstream, and the sheep was downstream. They drank from the same river, but the wolf accused the sheep of dirtying the water it drank. No matter how the sheep explained, the wolf still ate the sheep, because its purpose was not to discuss with the sheep who dirtied whose water, but to eat the sheep. Some people were puzzled, and some were angered by Aesop's attitude, cursing him for contempt of court. The judge, however, understood what Aesop meant, frowned and asked, "Are you no longer defending yourself?" Aesop nodded. "I have already defended myself, and I did not violate the oracle." The judge said with some regret, "You did not violate the oracle of the patron. The patron gave you the right to choose, and you made your own choice. But your choice angered the people, and you have to pay the price. Not violating the oracle does not mean that you are not guilty, and I will find you guilty." Thales suggested in front of the crowd. According to the law of the city, Aesop can choose to apologize to the gods and pay a sum of money to the city to atone for his sins. His actions did not violate the real interests of the people here. If there is, please come forward. Otherwise, the court should give Aesop this opportunity. The judge asked, "Merchants of Mytilene, Aesop brought back the gold you paid, but he did not take it for himself, nor did he deprive you of the right to offer sacrifices to the gods. The messenger of Delphi is here, and you can offer your gold to the messenger and bring it back to the Holy Land. If anyone thinks that what I said is wrong, you can come forward." No one came forward, and the judge said to Aesop, "I will give you a choice. You can offer a sum of money to the temple to atone for your sins." Aesop smiled. "All right, I will offer 30 silver coins." Everyone was stunned. The wealthiest merchant in Mytilene city, Aesop, was only willing to fork out 30 silver coins in order to atone for his sins. The judge frowned and asked, "Why so little?" "You're tuning in to the Lime's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.